Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. Chapter 1. Dark Demon is not the Dark Demon. Welcome to Street Marion Academy. In the Grand Hall, sacred hymns floated through the air as velvet smooth, pitch-black curtains slowly parted. Stepping onto the stage was the most beautiful and noble lady of Street Marion Academy, Headmistress Cynthia St. Art. Surrounding the St. Magus were 9 great spirits, transforming into flowers and fireflies, rendering the stage dreamlike and enchanting. The hall was adorned with 4 lavishly decorated long tables, above which thousands of floating candles illuminated the room. The candlelight reflected off the golden plates and silver goblets, refracting into a kaleidoscope of colors, creating a surreal and fantastical atmosphere. By the time Dark Demon came to his senses, he was already standing on the stage, next to the fragrant Headmistress Art. Memories flooded back into his mind like a flowing stream. Dark recalled his memories from his past life. Street Marion Academy. Isn't this the academy from that ultimate Frankenstein of a gal game that got trashed before release but became a hit afterward? Duel. Street Marion Super 20 Academy. In the gal game industry, where most budgets were poured into exquisite character art while the storylines were often poorly crafted, Duel. Street Marion Super 20 Academy was a rare breath of fresh air. Although its plot framework was almost entirely borrowed from Harry Potter, its power system was heavily inspired by card games like Yu-Gi-Oh, and the characters on the duel cards were sourced from various popular anime. The mix of elements somehow came together to form an unexpectedly fun game. Even without pursuing the female characters in the game, players could still derive immense enjoyment from it. For a long time, Duel. Street Marion Super 20 Academy even became a card game launcher, with various censored versions spreading like wildfire across the domestic pirated game scene. However, Dark, with his unwavering sense of justice, held firm to his morals and resolutely avoided this trashy game that was a mix of plagiarism, piracy, and adult content. Thus, he only knew about the game's settings and plot through hearsay. He vaguely remembered that the final boss of the game was a young noble named Dark Demon. As the only son of a duchess, Dark Demon played a role similar to Draco Malfoy in the game, serving as an early antagonist to oppose the protagonist. Later, it was suddenly revealed that he was a descendant of a demon god. After the resurrected Demon King was defeated, his bloodline awakened, transforming him into the final great demon god, giving the protagonist the opportunity to defeat him and steal his fiancée. Speaking of which, Dark Demon was truly a tragic character from the start. Even his name, when translated, meant Dark Demon, making him a clown destined for tragedy from the very beginning. Wait, why does that name sound so familiar? Dark Demon's face gradually turned pale. Dark Demon, Dark Demon. The comforting, warm voice calling his name pulled Dark out of his shock. He struggled to control the trembling muscles in his face and turned to Headmistress Art. Headmistress Art had silver hair as pure and flawless as moonlight, and beneath her long lashes were blue eyes that seemed capable of drawing in one's soul. As a romanceable character in the game, she was the moon of Street Marion, the most beautiful symbol. Her luxurious dress, tailored 2 sizes smaller than her actual measurements, accentuated the silver moon pendant resting on her chest, making it appear even more radiant. Dark realized he was at the opening banquet of Street Marion Academy, about to undergo the Academy's sorting ceremony as the first freshman to be called. He tried to recall his experiences since his rebirth. After recovering his memories from his past life, the memories of this life had become somewhat blurry. But by combining the original Harry Potter setting, he finally managed to piece things together. Street Marion Academy was the only academy in the kingdom capable of rivaling the Sacred Rite Academy. The academy was divided into 4 houses. These 4 houses were the Noble House, the Knight House, the Mage House, and the Fool House. Students of the Noble House were all pure-blooded nobles of high status. Students of the Knight House were brave and just, like knights. Students of the Mage House were inheritors of knowledge, wise and learned. Students of the Fool House, though lacking the bravery of knights or the wisdom of mages, were pure-hearted and held the greatest potential. Dark wasn't overly nervous about this. Before his demon god bloodline awakened, even the Academy's sorting card shouldn't be able to detect it. He was the son of a duke, the most noble bloodline below the royal family. He was bound to be sorted into the noble house. Otherwise, this crappy game wouldn't even be able to get off the ground. After calming down, Dark glanced at the area where the first-year students were seated, but among the sea of heads, it was difficult to spot anyone who looked like the original protagonist. Then Dark realized he didn't even know the original protagonist's name. But it didn't matter. As the son of the hero who sealed the Demon King, he would soon stand out like a firefly in the night. Dark took a deep breath and said, "Headmistress, I'm ready." As expected of the only son of the demon family. Headmistress Art smiled gently. One of the 9 spirits flying around her, a small griffin-like spirit, flew toward Dark. When it reached him, its previously empty beak now held a magic card. The back of the card featured a crown, a lance, a grimoire, and a tarot card the Fool, while the front was blank. "Take the sorting card in your hand, demon." Following Headmistress Art's instructions, Dark took the magic card from the spirit's beak. "Now, place the card in your right hand over your left hand. Think about what you like and what you desire, and the sorting card will guide you." "Understood, Headmistress." Dark closed his eyes and began to imagine. His knowledge of the game was limited. He only knew that as a villainous boss who played a significant role throughout the game, he would bring about his own downfall after awakening his demon god bloodline. And the awakening of his demon god bloodline seemed to occur on the day of his coming-of-age ceremony. Before the awakening, although he clashed with the original protagonist, it was all minor skirmishes, nothing life-threatening. His fiancée, the most popular female character in the game, only gave up on him after he transformed into a demon god, giving the original protagonist the chance to swoop in. So, as long as he found a way to suppress the power of his demon god bloodline before his coming-of-age ceremony, he would remain the son of a duke, holding a high position of power, with a fiancée who would stick by him no matter how badly he behaved. Perhaps things weren't as bad as they seemed? A blinding white light emanated from his palm, and Dark felt the sorting card heat up, as if it was imprinting something. Headmistress Art's gentle voice rang out again, "Demon, raise the sorting card and show this year's freshmen how to properly conduct the sorting ceremony." "Understood, Headmistress." Dark moved his right hand away and saw that the sorting card now displayed the crown symbolizing nobility. He raised the card high, infused it with magic, and activated it. Boom! Like fireworks, points of light shot out, forming a giant golden crown in the air. The sorting card announced, "Dark Demon, Noble House." Ooh! Cheers gradually rose from the long table where the other Noble House students were seated. "Dark Demon, the only son of the Duke known as the Valkyrie, has been sorted into our house." OMG! It seemed the young master was quite popular in the Noble House. A slight smile crept onto Dark's lips as he lowered his hand. Ding! Detected that the demon god bloodline has entered the awakening stage, triggering D-Minute. Chapter 2, Dark Demon just wants to live a chill life amid the cheers of the Noble Academy students. Dark Demon stepped down from the stage. Though his smile was slightly stiff, he still tried to raise his arm to give his supporters the response they deserved. As a noble of pure blood, he had to maintain a level of etiquette that went beyond the necessary, avoiding any behavior that might seem too out of place. Even though he now harbored deep doubts about his so-called pure blood. What kind of pure bloodline carries the blood of a demon god? Sitting down in the Noble Academy's seating area, Dark turned to face the stage. In that instant, the forced smile on his face completely crumbled. The demon god's bloodline has entered the awakening stage. This shocked him even more than the system's activation. What caused the demon god's bloodline to awaken prematurely? In the game, this was supposed to trigger in the late stages due to some unknown reason, right? Why did it have to trigger now, just as I regained my memories? Could this be the reason? No, I don't have time to dwell on this right now. If I don't want to be blasted off the stage by Principal Alter's magic spirit cannon, I need to figure something out quickly. Fortunately, according to the system prompt, the demon god's bloodline has only just entered the awakening stage and hasn't fully awakened yet. There's still hope. Dark's eyes flickered as he tried to call out to the system in his mind. "Hello, host. The demon god assistance system is at your service. Damn this demon god assistance." Dark gritted his teeth. This cursed system existed solely to help him become a demon god. But the war between humans and demons had ended over a decade ago, concluding with the complete annihilation of the demons and the sealing of the Demon King. Humanity had since entered the Saint Marian era, an age without demons. In this Saint Marian era, where demons were extinct and the Demon King was in eternal slumber, where was there any room for heresy? Hadn't the original Demon King, after breaking free from its seal, been mercilessly beaten down? Even worse, it had been split into 7 parts, each one being desecrated one after another. Though the demon god stood above the demon king, what could a lone commander do? If exposed, wouldn't it just mean certain death? It was even worse off than the demon king. At least the demon king had 7 lives. Can you tell me how to fully awaken the demon god's bloodline? Pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, and lust. These are the 7 deadly sins required for the awakening of the demon god. Once any one of these 7 indicators surpasses the critical threshold, the 7 sins will converge, and the host's demon god bloodline will gradually awaken, irreversibly transforming you into a great demon god. Current awakening progress, 0%. Please strive to complete the indicators as soon as possible. Show me the indicators. Understood. A moment later. 7 indicators appeared in Dark's field of vision. Pride, 92, envy, 39, wrath, 93, sloth, 71, greed, 72, gluttony, 52, lust, 72. As Dark's eyes swept over them, he felt his vision darken. Out of the 7 indicators, aside from envy and gluttony being slightly lower, the rest were all above 70. The wrath indicator was especially high at 93, glowing a deep, ominous red. So, I'm a lazy, arrogant, greedy, pleasure-seeking, and extremely short-tempered piece of trash? This can't be right. The cap must be 1000. The Demon God Assistance System kindly reminds you, the normal cap for sin indicators is 120. With the Demon God's bloodline entering the awakening stage, the host will be more prone to corruption. By continuing to strive, you can break through the critical thresholds for pride and wrath, fully awaken the Demon God's bloodline, and reclaim the glory of the demon race. Strive, my foot. Do you believe I'll slap you? No, no. I can't get angry. I absolutely can't get angry again. In the blink of an eye, the wrath indicator rose by a full point. Dark quickly closed his eyes, calming his mind and chanting, Great Vajra Dragon, Earth Store Bodhisattva, Prajna Buddhas, Prajna Paramita. Wrath +1, damn it. A few minutes later, Dark realized that the 7 indicators weren't static. The one that fluctuated the most was clearly the wrath indicator. After doing his utmost to calm down, the wrath indicator gradually dropped back to 93. On the other hand, indicators like pride and envy, which were tied to his fundamental nature, were much harder to reduce. As the saying goes, it's easier to move a mountain than to change one's nature. Even though he had regained his memories from his past life, his pride had only dropped from 92 to 91. After all, his memories from this life hadn't been erased. He had genuinely spent over a decade as a spoiled noble brat. That deeply ingrained arrogance wasn't something that could be eradicated overnight. Even though he was now fully aware of it, it would still take a long period of self-discipline to gradually change. He had to lower all 7 indicators below the standard threshold. Otherwise, with just one slip-up, the corresponding emotion could easily surge past the critical point. Extreme emotions were more prone to explosive growth. And once they surged, it would be difficult to bring them back down to the original standard. Only by cultivating self-discipline, curbing arrogance and impatience, restraining anger and obsession, avoiding greed and lust, and overcoming envy and sloth could he suppress the 7 deadly sins of the demon god's bloodline and seize a chance at survival. Dark had an epiphany. From today onward, I, Dark Demon, will be a new man. Please strive to fall into corruption to become a demon god. Get lost. Wrath +1. While Dark was having his great realization, the sorting ceremony on stage continued. One by one, new students were assigned to the academy most suited to them, and the Noble Academy also welcomed new students. However, given the intricate relationships among the nobility, no one dared to sit next to the son of a duke. The Valkyrie, Alvet Saint Demon, had swept across battlefields with absolute martial prowess, dedicating her life to eradicating evil and vanquishing countless demons. In the end, she had even assisted the hero of the time in sealing the Undying Demon King, earning the title of Twin Swords of the Kingdom alongside the hero, revered by all. With the hero having sacrificed himself to seal the Demon King, Alvet now stood as the kingdom's strongest martial force. Only a handful of individuals, such as the principal of St. Marian Academy, the Pope of the Holy Church, and the headmaster of the Holy Rite Academy, could rival her. If not for the awakening of the demon god's bloodline, Dark could have relied on the Valkyrie's protection to live a life of luxury as the future duke, no matter how badly he behaved. Damn this demon god's bloodline. Wrath +1. Stay calm, stay calm. Dark quickly closed his eyes, emptying his mind and allowing his turbulent emotions to settle. Wrath -1. Hello, may I sit here? Dark kept his eyes closed. Then I'll sit down. Plop. You're acting so strange. Did you not sleep well last night? I have a soul-calming curse, here. I can lend it to you. Dark finally couldn't help but open his eyes, speaking in as calm and emotionless a tone as possible. Isn't the Soul Calming Curse, a curse-type magic card? You're using it to help someone sleep? Eh? Is that so? Diana Greybear exclaimed, her mouth slightly agape in a pitiful expression. Dark felt a twitch in his brow. He suddenly felt an uncontrollable surge of primal energy rising within him. Lust +1, damn it. Wrath +1, Chapter 3, Dark Demon doesn't understand jealousy. Diana Greybear, my name. And yours? Dark Demon. Greybear, the bear of the kingdom. Every member of the Great Bear family was born with immense strength, as strong as brown bears, regardless of gender. But what was up with this little Lily in front of him? Diana Greybear, who had just reached the age for enrollment, was even shorter than her peers. After climbing onto the stool, her feet couldn't even touch the ground. Her round, chubby cheeks were so tender they seemed to drip with milk. It made one want to reach out and pinch them. Stretch them, squish them, stretch them again. Bliss +1, greed +1, wait a minute. Dark suddenly thought of something. Could this girl be playing the role of Crabbe and Goyle, Malfoy's lackeys, in this game? There weren't many fools who would dare to cozy up to the son of a duke right after enrollment. Damn it, this trashy game is full of female characters. Dark steadied himself and decided, for the sake of his own life, to maintain a necessary distance from Diana. One thing dual. Street Mary and Super 20 Academy had in common with almost all gal games on the market was that every female character who appeared with exquisite artwork was a romanceable character. From a player's perspective, being able to romance the beautiful women around the antagonist was undoubtedly a highly tempting prospect. Moreover, lolis were an essential element in gal games. But none of this had anything to do with Dark. He had no thoughts about Diana other than wanting to pinch her cheeks. Keeping his distance was also to prevent himself from becoming obsessed with pinching. In the early stages of self-cultivation, staying away from temptation was the best approach. And after these past few minutes, Dark had completely lost confidence in his self-control. He could manage to curb his pride, but how was he supposed to curb his impatience, anger, greed, and lust? Greed was the driving force behind human progress. Reproduction was a necessary act for the continuation of a species. Dark was troubled. Imametis. Night House. Saraswati. Mage House. Klein Moretti. Fool House. As time passed, only one freshman remained to undergo the sorting ceremony. He became the center of attention, receiving the collective gaze of the entire student body of Street Marion Academy. Dark couldn't help but look over. The last freshman to take the stage had short black hair. His features weren't particularly refined, but they were all above average, blending together in a way that was pleasing to the eye. In contrast, Dark himself was the type with every feature refined to perfection, a sharp, handsome blonde boy. As the game's persistent antagonist, he was affectionately nicknamed Golden Boy by players, said to be the older brother of Yellow Hair. Vert Gold. A pun on White God? Are you seriously this lazy with names? Dark was too exhausted to even make complaints. Alright, this guy is definitely the original protagonist. Gold? As in the Gold family of the hero's lineage? As Vert Gold appeared, the students in the hall couldn't help but start discussing. Compared to the Demon family, which had always been active in the public eye, the Gold family had faded into obscurity after the hero's sacrifice. Whenever someone asked, the prophets would always dramatically repeat the same line: since ancient times, whenever a hero appears, it is when humanity needs them most. So, does disaster come first, or does the hero? Does the arrival of disaster bring forth the hero? Or does the hero's appearance trigger the disaster? Both prophets and sages always remain tight-lipped about this question. Dark, do you think the hero's son will join our house? Diana asked, her eyes shining. Not just her, but many in the noble house were also looking forward to Vert Gold joining their ranks. Although the Gold family kept a low profile, they had been a noble lineage since ancient times. It wouldn't be out of place for him to be sorted into the noble house. If Vert Gold joins our house, wouldn't that mean the twin swords of the kingdom are complete? The noble house students buzzed with excitement, their tones filled with hidden anticipation. However, their wishes were destined to go unfulfilled. Dark watched as Rage-1 floated across his vision and couldn't help but smile subtly. It seems I can manage it if I try, huh? Vert Gold. Night House. The fireworks released by the sorting card formed a giant lance in the air. Amid the wild cheers of the Night House, Vert Gold walked over to their table. We've got gold. We've got gold. The entire hall echoed with the name Vert Gold. The cheers even more passionate and fervent than when Dark had completed his sorting ceremony. Jealousy +1, DM it. Rage +1, Dark quickly reined in his emotions. He didn't feel jealous at all, so why did the jealousy indicator go up? This trashy system must be broken. Dark felt his dignity had been insulted. Headmistress Art's gentle voice quieted the cheers, Freshman, keep your sorting cards safe. They will guide you through the next 6 years of your academy life. At Street Marion Academy, the sorting ceremony was also the process of issuing sorting cards. Every freshman received a sorting card during the ceremony. This card not only represented the student's identity but was also the first magic card they would personally create after enrollment. It would serve as an essential tool for academy life, accompanying students for all 6 years. Dark also looked at his sorting card. As the only son of a duke, he had naturally received a noble family's advanced education before enrollment. He had a basic understanding of magic, mages, and magic cards. In the kingdom, those who received an admission letter from Street Marion Academy were all individuals with magical talent, future mages. A mage's magic power grew with age. Repeated use of magic could improve the quality of one's magic, but it had limited effect on increasing the total amount of magic. Since there were no meditation techniques or secret methods to increase magic power, humans had been completely outmatched by the naturally powerful demons in the past. It wasn't until the appearance of Merlin, the most powerful mage in history, that the tide of battle turned. Merlin used alchemy to refine knowledge, magic, imagination, potions, and other elements into cards, creating the revolutionary magic cards. He selflessly shared this knowledge with the world. From then on, mages abandoned their wands and continuously created powerful magic cards, completely eradicating the demons, who had fallen behind the times. The sorting card provided by the academy was a semi-finished magic card. Students had to complete the final step themselves to create a full-fledged sorting card. Headmistress Art concluded her speech with a few brief words, then drew out a magic card from the culinary series. With a gentle wave, she covered all the dining tables with exquisite delicacies. Faced with the mouth-watering array of food, all the students temporarily put aside other matters and happily dug in. Among them, only Dark stared at the food in front of him, frozen. Huh? Dark, don't you like this honey-glazed lamb leg? Then let Diana help you finish it. Diana quickly snatched Dark's honey-roasted lamb leg. Jealousy +1, Gluttony -1, Chapter 4, Dark Demon masters the art of moderation with Diana's help. Through gritted teeth, Dark successfully resisted the urge to indulge in gluttony. As for the envy +1 notification, Dark insisted that he had no idea what envy even was. He stared at his empty plate, suppressing the frustration bubbling inside him, and let his gaze wander over the feast spread across the table. Roast beef, roast chicken, lamb chops, sausages, steak, Yorkshire pudding, roasted creamy potatoes, gravy, tomato sauce, and beans. Maintaining an air of elegance, he discreetly swallowed his saliva. Dark scooped a small portion of beans from the large silver bowl and placed them onto his plate. Let's start with the beans. Gluttony isn't about eating, it's about indulgence. Eating in moderation shouldn't increase the gluttony indicator. As expected of the culinary creations of Principal Altair, who had been granted the title of saint, even the humble stewed beans had a unique flavor. Dark picked out a single bean from the pile, secured it with his silver fork, sliced it with his knife, and placed the pieces into his mouth one by one. As he chewed slowly, the flavor of the beans gradually spread across his palate. It was damn delicious. Dark couldn't help but narrow his eyes in satisfaction as he reached for another bean. Across from him, another Noble Academy freshman, Rose Floret, was holding a silver spoon, scooping a large heap of beans into her mouth. When she suddenly noticed her classmate eating beans with such refined elegance, Rose's cheeks flushed slightly, and she subtly retracted the spoon halfway to her mouth. Mimicking Dark's actions, Rose picked up her knife and fork, awkwardly trying to spear the beans, only to have them slip away repeatedly. This made her develop a bit of admiration for Dark, who could skillfully use his utensils to eat beans. I've always heard that the Duke's only son was a misbehaving, ill-mannered brat with no sense of nobility. Who knew the real him would be so cultured? Girls of this age often like to imagine others' personalities based on small details. Especially a girl like Rose, who had just escaped the rigid constraints of noble etiquette and was so exhilarated by the newfound freedom of school life that her brain was practically oxygen-deprived. Otherwise, she would never have imagined Dark as some paragon of nobility. Dark, who was busy battling the beans, didn't notice the girl's unusual behavior. As he neared the end of the beans on his plate, he began considering his next dish. Perhaps the Yorkshire pudding would be a good choice. Despite its name, Yorkshire pudding was more like a bread, with a texture similar to soft rolls. It was commonly served as a dessert alongside roast beef dishes. During preparation, the drippings from the roast beef were brushed onto the pudding pan, and once the oil began to smoke, the batter was poured in. After baking, the pudding would puff up into a bread-like shape, with a golden, crispy exterior and a soft, delicate interior, topped with a layer of gravy sprinkled with meat bits. Sigh. Just imagining it made Dark's mouth water. He was about to reach for the Yorkshire pudding when Diana suddenly spoke up. Hey, Dark. Do you like beans? Here, you can have my portion too. With that, she dumped her entire plate of beans onto Dark's plate. Then she added, consider it a thank you for the honey-glazed lamb leg. Turning back, she muttered under her breath, Diana doesn't really like beans anyway. Dark stared at the mountain of beans now piled on his plate, his eyebrow twitching involuntarily. Wrath +1, damn it. He wasn't actually that angry, but the wrath indicator had suddenly increased. Was it because the demon god's bloodline had entered the awakening stage, making him more prone to corruption? Dark silently continued eating the beans. His heart was anxious and irritable, but his demeanor remained calm and elegant, his movements unhurried. By the time he finished the mountain of beans, all the food on the table vanished in an instant. The main course was over. It was time for dessert. The table was now filled with various flavors of ice cream, apple pie, treacle tart, chocolate sponge cake, jam donuts, trifle, strawberry tart. An overwhelmingly sweet aroma filled the air. Dark stared silently at the desserts. He wasn't even full yet. The hunger in his stomach, combined with the rich scent of the desserts, was irresistible. He reached out for his favorite chocolate sponge cake, and the pent-up appetite he had been suppressing exploded. Gluttony +1, just 1 point. I've already reduced it by 1 earlier. Dark reached for the treacle tart next. Gluttony +1, it's fine. The gluttony indicator still has plenty of room. Starting tomorrow, I'll practice moderation. I'll definitely bring it back down. Gluttony +1, Dark ate a slice of strawberry tart before finally stopping. Then he picked up a damp towel and carefully wiped the sugar from the corners of his mouth. Dark, do you like desserts too? Diana loves desserts. Do you just dislike beans, or is there anything you don't like? Ignoring the girl's murmurs, Dark adjusted his posture slightly and glanced over at the Night Academy's table. By now, Whitgold's side was occupied by a new student chatting happily with him. If Dark's guess was correct, this was the protagonist's best friend, playing the role of Ron Weasley. Poor best friend. In Harry Potter, he spent his whole life doing dirty work but eventually landed Hermione Granger, successfully securing a comfortable life. But in the Gal Game duel, St. Marian's Super 20 Academy, he was destined to end up with nothing. A lonely life might be his final fate. Dark couldn't help but sigh. At least he had a fiancée to look forward to, who would enroll next year. So, where was the first female lead, the one playing the role of Hermione Granger? Dark scanned the room a few times but didn't spot any girl particularly close to the protagonist, Wit, so he averted his gaze. However, even though Dark had already looked away, Wit, with his keen perception, had noticed his gaze. Perhaps Dark's aura was too striking among his peers, making it hard to ignore. Who's that guy with his nose in the air? Wit whispered. His Ron equivalent, Robert Broheim, asked in confusion, isn't everyone's nose in the air? I mean his forehead. Wit pointed to his own head. Robert shrugged. If you're talking about the blonde guy, that's Dark Demon, the son of the kingdom's only female duke, Alvet Saint Demon. Wit murmured, Alvet Demon. The Valkyrie who, alongside my father, was called one of the twin swords of the kingdom? Then her son must be as virtuous and justice-driven as the Valkyrie herself? Maybe I can become friends with him? PFFT. Robert couldn't help but laugh. Wit, not everyone inherits their parents' good qualities like you do. Wit, really? But I don't even know what my parents look like. Chapter 5, Dark Day Montana tries to become a top student after returning. Don't forget to use your house card to check the school rules. Finally, I wish all new students to find your own value in St. Marian Academy over the next 6 years. The opening ceremony concluded amidst the students' cheers. Headmaster Art did not offer any plot guiding hints like Headmaster Dumbledore in Harry Potter. This left Dark feeling somewhat uncertain. However, upon closer reflection, he reasoned that even if something bad were to happen, the protagonist would be the one to deal with it. What did it have to do with him, a villain? He should focus on taking care of himself. St. Marian Academy was a closed school. Students could not leave the campus except during annual holidays. Once the school gates closed, money, power, and connections would be cut off from the outside world. Knowledge, ability, and academic credits were the greatest determinants of rank. Even as the son of a duke, becoming a bottom-ranked student would invite scorn. Moreover, those who could enter St. Marian Academy were all future archmages. They held no fear of noble authority. Dark was aware that his reputation was less than stellar. Only the noble house students, being pure-blooded nobles themselves, might feel some empathy and befriend him. But this suited his intentions perfectly. He wanted to reduce social interactions, cultivate his character, and while maintaining a detached lifestyle, delve into knowledge and find a way to completely eradicate the demon god bloodline before it fully awakened. St. Marian Academy, second only to the Holy Right Academy within the kingdom, possessed the deepest foundations and the largest collection of books. If even here he couldn't find a method to remove the demon god bloodline, then it was essentially hopeless. Following the senior students, they exited the Great Hall, ascended the marble stairs, traversed winding corridors filled with portraits, and crossed a high-hanging bridge. Finally, the Noble House freshmen arrived at the tower located in the southwest of the academy, the Noble House Dormitory. St. Marian Academy had 4 such towers, each with 9 floors excluding the basement. The first floor served as a common room. From the second floor upwards were the dormitories for 1st to 6th year students, in ascending order. The 8th floor above was a dueling practice room, and the 9th floor was an observatory. The guardian golem of the noble house was a legendary creature known as the Feathered Serpent. Feathered serpents possessed vibrant, colorful wings. They were profound and wise, gentle and elegant. Incapable of lying, they could see through falsehood and perceive truth, earning them the title of truth speakers. The Noble House Dormitory Tower was unique among the 4 houses in that it didn't require any credentials, passwords, or other keys to enter directly. This was due to the presence of the Feathered Serpent Golem. Simply passing before this golem allowed it to discern whether or not you were a student of the Noble House. Dark watched as Diana dashed into the tower with her usual fiery energy and followed suit. As he passed before the Feathered Serpent, the golem perched by the entrance abruptly opened its serpentine eyes. The pupils were vertical, bright, and full of spirit, utterly unlike a lifeless golem. Dark fell silent, holding his breath. However, the white light emanating from the Feathered Serpent's eyes merely scanned him once before retracting. Then, the Feathered Serpent closed its eyes again, becoming utterly still and silent. Dark quickly quickened his pace, entering the tower, and finally released a heavy sigh of relief. I almost thought the demon god bloodline had been discovered. Originally, when Dark saw that the awakening of the demon god bloodline even had a progress bar, he thought there was still room for error. But now, seeing this, even with only 1% awakened, it couldn't escape the truth-seeing eyes of this Feathered Serpent Golem. Is this the legendary hell difficulty? Dark, what's your room number? Diana, clutching her house card, ran back over. Dark glanced at the entrance with lingering fear and injected magic power into his own house card. The crown pattern on the front of the house card faded, revealing the information he sought. Room 201. Diana's is 233, that's so far away. Aren't we in the same building? Dark casually brushed her off with a few words and quickly ascended to the 2nd floor, finding the room located at the very front of the 2nd floor. Only after entering the room and locking the door did he gradually relax, a wry smile creeping onto his face. I haven't felt this much pressure in both lifetimes combined. The dormitory was a single-person room, complete with a soft, large bed and a private bathroom. Fresh bedding and a complete set of first-year textbooks were laid out on the bed. Dark barely managed to make the bed before his brain, overwhelmed by fatigue, shut down. I'll think about it tomorrow. Dawn had just broken. Dark wearily opened his eyes. A copper wall clock hung on the wall opposite the bed, its hands just pointing to 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock? Classes start at 8, right? I'll sleep a little longer. Laziness +1, a cruel system notification suddenly floated before his eyes. Dark jolted awake, all trace of sleepiness vanishing. Crap. A plant. The wrath index didn't increase. Dark wiped away a bead of sweat. Currently, the smallest margin for error was with arrogance and wrath, while jealousy and gluttony were relatively more lenient. 15 minutes later, Dark, now dressed in his school uniform, arrived at the common room on the 1st floor. The noble house uniform was black with gold trim, featuring a small crown emblem on the chest. The academy also provided a matching card holder capable of holding 21 magic cards. The common room was quiet. Magic lamps hanging on the walls automatically illuminated when someone entered. Having lost the joy of a morning nap, Dark slumped into a seat with a despondent expression. He then took out his textbooks one by one from his shoulder bag. To eradicate the demon god bloodline, besides finding the right method, necessary knowledge and abilities were also crucial. Imagine, how despairing would it be if a magic book containing the correct method was right in front of you, yet you couldn't understand it at all. The antonym of laziness is diligence. Dark picked out the textbook needed for his first class today, Elementary Summoning Guide. Summoning technique, as the means to awaken magic cards, was a fundamental spell every archmage must master. And scheduling summoning class as the first lesson on Monday was to teach freshmen how to summon the familiars from their house cards. Under the slightly dim yellow light, Dark de Montana opened the textbook, beginning to preview in the common room, where he was the only person present. A few minutes later, Dark gradually got into the zone. In his previous life, He was at least a university graduate, possessing more than sufficient literacy skills. Among his peers, the young mages, probably no one had stronger literacy skills than him. Perhaps becoming a top student wouldn't be bad either? Arrogance +1. Dark suddenly realized he had improved. He hadn't even mentioned that planned. If one could get into a state of focused learning, the feeling was actually quite pleasant. Because you could genuinely feel yourself making progress. Humanity's thirst for knowledge was innate. Continuously acquiring knowledge, exploring the unknown, and solving mysteries were what paved the way for one great era after another. After studying earnestly for an hour. Greed +1, Grap. Wrath +1, Chapter 6, Dark Daemon cannot abandon his greed for knowledge. The September air had begun to cool, and a touch of chill graced the mornings of St. Marian, much like the indifferent world itself, beautiful, yet frigid. Shiver me timbers. Dark could never have imagined that a thirst for knowledge could be seen as greed. Has this demon bloodline become so shameless in its pursuit of awakening? What to do now? Should he still read this book? Should he still attend classes? Laziness versus diligence. Knowledge-seeking versus greed. How could he possibly strike a balance between these? Was Dark studying too diligently? Or was he studying for too long? Dark glanced up at the cuckoo clock hanging above the fireplace. Unknowingly, it was already 7:20 a.m. I probably studied for 65 minutes, but the time I truly entered a focused state should be within 50 minutes. It was also with prolonged reading that I gradually developed a desire to acquire more related knowledge. Desire that becomes so intense that it can never be satisfied. That becomes greed. But ordinary people should rarely reach that level. Dark was self-aware enough in this regard to know he wasn't someone who thirsted for knowledge. Therefore, it must be that as the demon bloodline entered the awakening phase, it caused the lower limit for triggering the sin of greed to become extremely low. Assuming others needed a level 10 desire to be considered greed, he might only need level 9, or even 8, or 7, to be deemed greedy. So, it wasn't that he couldn't study. Rather, he couldn't study too intensely. Attending classes normally, completing homework in a standard fashion, should all still be within the margin of error. Active learning and passive learning are definitely different. As for whether this was truly the case, he needed to conduct a few small experiments. Dark took a deep breath. The greed index was at 73, still with plenty of leeway, allowing for multiple trials and errors. Fools would choose to retreat at his point. The wise would attempt to find a suitable method. Pride +1, Dark closed his textbook. The common room had become much more populated, though he had been so immersed in the ocean of knowledge that he hadn't noticed. After tidying up his books, Dark slung his shoulder bag over his shoulder and left the tower alone. He crossed the bridge and entered the castle proper. The interior of the Academy's castle was intricate and complex, but the house card would guide the way. The food in the Academy cafeteria was rich and diverse, unlike the welcome feast last night, which had been almost devoid of vegetarian options. Dark selected a small amount of simple food and ate a frugal yet decent breakfast. Following the guidance of his house card, he then found the classroom for his first lesson. It was almost 8 o'clock, and most of the new students were arriving around this time. The summoning classroom was large, a lecture hall capable of accommodating 2 classes. It seemed the first class for the Noble House freshmen was to be held jointly with the Night House freshmen. Dark quietly made his way to the corner position in the last row on the left, placing his bag in the drawer. Hey! He had barely sat down when the elusive Diana, as if she had already decided on him, shamelessly stuck close. Dark glanced at her face, as smooth as a freshly peeled egg, and quickly suppressed the urge to pinch it. Good thing my awareness is fast enough. Dark restrained his fingers and pointed somewhat casually to the front row. Diana was about to sit beside him when she curiously asked, "Does Dark want me to sit with her?" Dark hadn't said anything yet. Diana then happily declared, "She looks like a rather withdrawn duckling, Diana will go help her out." Dark still said nothing. And Diana had already gone off on her own to the front row, engaging in tete-a-tete with the girl who seemed somewhat timid. Jealousy +1, dodged the first A, but couldn't dodge the 15th. Dark fell silent. Rose Flotty nervously dealt with the overly enthusiastic Diana. The girl, who had just celebrated her birthday half a month ago, had never even stepped outside her castle before coming to St. Marian Academy. Her parents had died at the hands of the Demon King's army. Afterwards, she had spent 4 years in an orphanage before being taken in by her uncle, a Viscount, at the age of 5. Viscount Flotty and his wife had been married for 10 years without children. Originally, they had intended to bring her home, a blood relative, to raise as their daughter. However, unexpectedly, just half a year after she entered the castle, the Viscountess became pregnant. Thus, Rose, who had only enjoyed half a year of little princess treatment, once again became a neglected burden. The Viscount and his wife, concerned about appearances, didn't want to send her back to the orphanage, so they simply left her in the castle to be cared for by the maids. 3 meals a day were provided without fail, and she was given preschool education books and taught noble etiquette, but that was all. She was confined to her room in the castle. Occasionally, she would look out the window and see the Viscount and Viscountess playing in the garden with her gradually growing younger cousin, and her heart would ache. A person's personality is greatly influenced by their family environment. Rose gradually became introverted, fond of fantasy, yet also noticeably timid, afraid to reach out. And at this time, Diana, who appeared before her, was like a ray of light, shining into her heart. Rose was gradually won over by Diana, and the 2 young girls became inseparable. Childhood friendships are pure and precious, and difficult to regain in adulthood. And Dark, who had inadvertently facilitated this development, was happy to see it happen. With Diana having a new friend, she probably won't bother me anymore, right? He tilted his head slightly, letting the wind caress his cheeks, then looked out a window in the direction the breeze was blowing. St. Marian's unique Heim lily had bloomed. The first-year summoning arts instructor, Professor Sarah Self, strode into the classroom a second before the bell rang. The classroom, which had been exceptionally noisy due to the novelty of the new semester, instantly fell silent. It wasn't that the freshmen had simply closed their mouths, but as Professor Self entered, a wind of silence swept through the classroom, causing all sound to vanish in an instant. The Noble House students were mostly students who had received elite preschool education, and most immediately realized that Professor Self had used a silence card. However, many in the Night House had no such concept. Robert, sitting next to Vit, even screamed in terror, his cheeks and neck flushed red as if boiled. When Professor Self reached the podium and lifted the silence, Robert's shriek suddenly erupted. Bro, hey, considering it's the first lesson, I'll temporarily refrain from deducting your house points. Professor Self, pushing a strand of pale golden hair that had fallen in front of her eyes behind her pointed ears, said with an indifferent expression. Before class, let's go over the school rules. I believe most of you haven't read them yet. I am Sarah Self, a half-elf, and the summoning arts professor at St. Marian Academy. A class at St. Marian Academy lasts 90 minutes. The first class starts at 8 in the morning, with a half-hour break between classes, and the second class ends at 11:30 a.m. In the afternoon, there is only one class, starting at 2 o'clock. The Academy adopts a house point system, and like Hogwarts, there is a house cup, not just a mere honor, but a real Holy Grail. The Marian Holy Grail is said to be a magical artifact that has existed since the Academy's founding. Because it possesses the power to grant wishes, it is also known as the Wishing Cup. Among the 4 houses, the house with the highest house points will receive the House Cup. The Wishing Cup will grant everyone in that house, from 1st to 6th year, a chance to make a wish. Engraved on the Wishing Cup is an inscription, "Greedy ones gain nothing." Chapter 7, Dark de Montan is familiar as seriously problematic. When Professor Sarah mentioned the Wishing Cup, both the seemingly calm Noble House freshman and the boisterous Night House freshman couldn't help but start chattering. Robert, who had just embarrassed himself, learned absolutely nothing from it. His voice, the loudest in the Night House, rose in excitement until his neck turned red again. Victor, did you hear what Professor Sarah said? If we can get the Wishing Cup, each of us can make a wish. Don't get too excited, redneck Robert. The professor said it offers a chance to make a wish, not that it will grant wishes. Victor, though also excited, was clearly thinking more clearly. On the other side, Diana was the voice of the Noble House. She was excitedly exclaiming to Rose, and then, feeling it wasn't enough, she jumped over to Dark and said, "If we get the Wishing Cup, I'm going to wish for a chocolate wall, candy lights, gummy bear bed, cake roof, cookie carpet, pudding cushions, super candy house. And it has to be this big." Watching Diana happily describe her dream candy house, Dark almost got caught up in her enthusiasm. Seeing that greed +1 didn't appear in his vision, Dark secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he smiled and reminded her, "Diana, the greedy are left with nothing. If the Wishing Cup could truly grant any wish, it wouldn't be placed in St. Marian Academy for students to compete for." Judging from the inscription on the Wishing Cup, the wishes it could grant were likely trivial matters. Otherwise, Dark would definitely wish to eradicate the demon god bloodline directly. And make that damn system disappear as soon as possible. This time, Professor Sarah didn't use a silence card. Instead, she waited for the freshman's chatter to gradually subside before lightly tapping on the desk and saying, "Besides determining the ownership of the Academy Cup, academic credits are also the hard currency of St. Marian. With academic credits, you can purchase anything you desire on Traveler's Street, or trade with any teacher or student in St. Marian. Of course, every transaction you make will be recorded by your house card. Only credits obtained through legitimate transactions will be recognized by the Academy. Finally, does anyone know how to earn academic credits? Professor Sarah placed her hands on the lectern, her gaze sweeping seriously across the classroom. As a half-elf, Professor Sarah inherited the ethereal beauty and long lifespan of elves. Her appearance showed absolutely no trace of age. Although she always looked serious, she occasionally revealed a gentler expression in private. This, in fact, became her selling point. In Duel St. Marian's Super 20 Academy, Professor Sarah was the most popular professor among players. Of course, she was also a romanceable character. If she hadn't displayed such a serious and rigid image right from the start, thus lowering certain favorability points, Dark's primal force might have erupted again. At that point, it wouldn't just be a question of whether to attend class or not, but whether to keep his life. Facing Professor Sarah's question, the freshmen from both houses were surprisingly unresponsive. It seemed they, like Dark, hadn't really read the school rules. After a good while, a student finally raised her hand. Professor Sarah glanced over and directly called out her name, Metis, please answer. Metis was a small girl with brown hair and a round, somewhat childish face. She seemed to be developing slower than her peers, but she was taller than Diana. She stood up a little nervously, accidentally biting her tongue, but managed to answer fairly smoothly. The simplest way to earn credits is to attend classes diligently. Each class earns 10 credits. If you can answer the professor's questions correctly, or satisfy the professor, you can also get extra points. Also, the results of the final exams can be converted into credits, and magic duels. Excellent, Metis, 5 points added. Professor Sarah clapped her hands, signaling her to sit down, and then continued to add, correctly answering questions in class can earn extra points, but if you don't pay attention in class, the lecturer also has the right to deduct corresponding credits. In addition, magic duel competitions are highly valued in St. Marian, and they can bring a large number of credits to each house. As for how to participate in duel competitions, your dueling class teacher will tell you. Now, let's officially begin the lesson. Open your elementary summoning guide. Miss Know-It-All, huh? Dark glanced at Emma's back again, realizing that she should be the last member of the protagonist trio. However, Emma's fluffy brown hair and the lingering baby fat on her face didn't pique his interest. Dark neither wanted to have contact with them, nor did he feel the need to specifically avoid them. Especially since this female protagonist's appearance didn't hit his sweet spot. Next, Professor Sarah began teaching the most basic summoning technique. Summoning technique was a technique based on magic cards, capable of summoning spirits, items, potions, and all sorts of things sealed within magic cards. It was said that at deeper levels, there were also various summoning arts such as sacrifice summoning, fusion summoning, ritual summoning, and reverse summoning. Some magic cards even came with special summoning incantations. Proficiency in summoning technique determined how many magic cards a duelist could use within the same time frame. In short, if it took you 5 seconds to cast a summoning technique, while your opponent only needed 3 seconds, they could attack 2 seconds earlier than you. If your summoning technique cooldown was 30 seconds, you might not even be able to use a third magic card within a minute. The famous dueling master Swiss Luzon once said, summoning technique determines a duelist's upper and lower limits. And the learning task for this lesson was to use summoning technique to summon the familiar sealed within their house cards. Professor Sarah spent half an hour explaining the school rules, another half hour teaching the preliminary theory of summoning technique, and finally left half an hour for students to experiment. After confirming that the greed index hadn't increased, Dark followed the steps in the textbook to attempt summoning. Because he had previewed in the common room in the morning, his progress was faster than almost all the other freshmen. And because the house card itself was a beginner's item, the summoning activation settings were even easier than ordinary magic cards. So, at a few minutes past 9 o'clock, Dark successfully summoned the familiar within his house card. The house card was a composite magic card, very special, with very powerful built-in functions. Because the final step of making the house card was completed by the students themselves, each student summoned a different familiar using their house card. In the name of Dark the Montana, familiar summon. The house card adopted a special summoning incantation to reduce the difficulty of summoning. As Dark correctly recited the incantation, the magic power within his body surged along his fingertips into the house card. The house card then erupted with a dazzling, daylight-bright radiance, attracting countless gazes. Emma, who had also previewed but failed several summoning attempts, couldn't help but look over. Under the white light, Dark's fair face, handsome features, and calm eyes left a deep impression on Emma. She gritted her teeth, not even looking at what Dark had summoned, and quickly flipped through the textbook, searching for mistakes, and re-attempted summoning. Her competitive spirit was on full display. But Dark was not at ease at this moment. He suddenly realized that the magic power was surging out faster and faster, as if the house card was actively absorbing his magic power. The magic power that had increased due to the demon god bloodline's awakening phase was almost completely drained. At this moment, a six-pointed star magic circle suddenly appeared on the house card. This is... Looking at the familiar he had summoned using the house card, Dark felt that there was a big problem. It was a small demon in the shape of a bat. And, not just any ordinary small demon. Chapter 8, Dark Demon deeply understands the way of balancing work and rest. The demon. Is that a demon type? Professor Sarah had somehow appeared beside Dark without him noticing. The unique fragrance of the elven race wafted into his nostrils, causing a slight itch in his heart. Dark inhaled slightly and asked, puzzled, Professor, hasn't the era of the demon race passed? Why am I still able to summon a demon type? Professor Sarah explained in an extremely calm tone, the familiar of the house card is merely a type of magical spirit, and strictly speaking, it belongs to alchemical products. It's just like a golem, not a true living being. The so-called demon type is just a classification of magical spirits, not to say it is actually a demon. As a magician, you must learn to discern reality, explore truth, and not be deceived by appearances. As for why you summoned a demon type, it's related to your magic power, knowledge, and personality. Furthermore, the technology of magical spirits is actually not perfect, and many things cannot yet be explained. The surrounding freshmen nodded as if they understood, yet remained unenlightened. Only Dark asked very seriously, then Professor, what is my familiar's name? Professor Sarah said sternly, that will be your homework assignment. Before the next summoning class, successfully summon your own familiar, and research its type, name, and characteristics, and write a report of about 300 words for me. Alright, demon, 5 points. With that, Professor Sarah walked towards another student. Dark watched her back, suspecting that she simply didn't know the name of this demon type at all. After all, this thing was demon. Duel. St. Marian's Super 20 Academy truly lived up to its name as an ultimate patchwork monstrosity. Even Digimon was borrowed, copied, and referenced, plagiarized. Although he knew early on that this game was a hodgepodge, it shouldn't be directly copied like this, right? Dark felt a headache coming on. The Devimon seemed to be able to evolve into Myotismon. The evolutionary branches of Digimon were too numerous and messy, he couldn't quite remember them clearly. However, the familiars of the house card should belong to the lower-tier magical spirits. Their main purpose was to help their masters transmit messages or send and receive letters, taking on the role of owls. According to the magician's explanation, the intelligence level of familiars was 2.5, slightly lower than ordinary beasts, and harmless. Dark teased Devimon his head and found that its reactions were still somewhat sluggish, perhaps because it had just been born. Devimon his body was round and chubby, with bat-like wings and three-fingered claws. A white skull was imprinted on its forehead, and looking at it for too long, it was even a bit ugly cute. The key was that it had wings and could fly, making it a more suitable type to be a familiar. Dark quickly accepted the fact that he had summoned Devimon. After all, the demon of a demon god, wouldn't it be a little demon? Next, Dark began to glance around randomly. To put it nicely, it was called observing the progress of his classmates, but in reality, it was daydreaming. Unknowingly, he had been seriously attending class for over an hour. If he didn't take a break to relax, wouldn't he be in trouble? An idea gradually formed in Dark's mind. Then, he suddenly realized. Being too engrossed in studying would lead to triggering the greed index, so if he took more breaks from studying and achieved a balance between work and rest, wouldn't that be the perfect solution? Bingo. Dark promptly suppressed his feeling of triumph, not allowing it to evolve into pride. Perhaps because he was setting an example, the freshman became more proactive in learning summoning arts. Finally, Miss Know-It-All was the second to successfully summon her familiar. The moment Emimeta successfully summoned her familiar, she didn't immediately observe what kind of creature it was, but subconsciously turned her head to look at the corner position at the back of the classroom. Her eyes clearly carried a hint of rivalry, as if wanting to say, "Look, I succeeded too." However, Dark's gaze merely brushed against hers and passed by, seemingly not caring about her at all. Emma turned her head back, feeling a little unhappy. But the small familiar crouching on her desk quickly brought a smile back to her face. It was a tiny otter with snow-white fur. Whether it was its bin-sized eyes, or its short limbs, or its timid posture of rubbing its face and squeaking eek, eek, it deeply struck the cute spot in the young girl's heart. As expected, it's an otter. Dark had long anticipated this. Otters are sharp and alert, with strong curiosity, and they are also the guardian spirit of Miss Know-It-All in the original story. Naturally, it was the most likely option. Then Robert's familiar should be a hound, and Vit's familiar should be a stag? Dark glanced over there, but found that Robert and Vit were both scratching their heads in frustration. Their progress was clearly not going smoothly. In fact, freshmen from the noble house generally summoned their familiars faster than freshmen from the night house. This was the advantage of preschool education. Wow! An overly surprised cry attracted Dark's attention. He discovered that Diana had also successfully summoned her familiar before the end of class. It was an iron-eating beast with a round head and a round body. The panda, only the size of a doll, lay on the desk, its eyes still drowsy, looking adorably silly. A familiar that really matches her perfectly. Dark couldn't help but cover his eyes. The Greedle Bear family, the dignified kingdom's bear, how could such a simpleton have emerged? Well, okay. Pandas are also bears. Diana, however, was clearly extremely satisfied with her familiar, even directly lifting it above her head and spinning it around wildly, until Professor Sarah glared at her, and she quickly restrained herself. Rose, the only one who hadn't summoned a familiar, couldn't help but become anxious. The second class in the morning was magic theory. If summoning arts was the method of using magic cards, then magic theory was the basic theory for making magic cards. And the corresponding dual class was combat practice. Students were forbidden from summoning familiars in the academy corridors, but there were still people who disobeyed the rules, carrying their familiars and running around everywhere. Dark ignored those people and went to the magic theory classroom ahead of time. The break between classes was a full half hour. Lazy people wasted time, diligent people had already begun to preview the material. In order not to be judged as lazy, Dark took out the Magic Theory textbook, Basic Magic Theory 1, and flipped through it, not too seriously. Therefore, when Emma Meadows rushed into the classroom, she saw someone sitting in the last row by the window, diligently and earnestly studying. This really didn't seem like something someone from the noble house would do. Normally, someone like that should go to the Magic Academy instead. Emma muttered such things and found a seat in the first row, also taking out her textbook to preview. Dark glanced at Emma in the front row on the right, but in his mind he was thinking about whether there were any magic cards that could alleviate his current predicament. He wasn't asking to eradicate the demon god bloodline, only to absorb some negative emotions, or to calm one's mind. Chapter 9, Dark Demon actually enters a devil's den. The professor for magic theory was Professor Kazel, an alchemy master with goblin blood. In an era where magic technology was gradually replacing ancient alchemy techniques, Professor Kazel's position was somewhat awkward. However, this did not hinder his proficiency in magic technology. Professor Kazel didn't delve into overly profound knowledge in the first magic theory class. Instead, he introduced the students to some basic common sense about magic cards. Magic cards were divided into 5 main categories: spirit cards, magic cards, item cards, field cards, and mystic cards. Beyond these, there were also god cards and mystery cards. God cards were cards possessing divine power. Mystery cards referred to unknown cards. Professor Kazel mainly lectured on spirit cards in this class. Spirit cards were magic cards capable of summoning magic spirits. Spirit cards primarily had 7 data points, 1 true name. Only by calling out the true name could a magic spirit be summoned. 2 rank. The spirit's rank was represented by the number of stars. Ordinary summoning technique could only summon 1-star to 3-star spirits. Spirits of 3 stars and above required advanced special summoning technique. 3 race. Spirit cards had 15 races: humanoid, demi-human, dragon, angel, demon, undead, elemental, fairy, machine, insect, reptilian, beast, bird, plant, fish, and phantom god. 4 attribute. Spirit cards had 20 attributes: normal, fire, water, electric, grass, ice, fighting, poison, ground, flying, psychic, bug, rock, ghost, dragon, dark, steel, fairy, light, and dark. 5 magic power. Magic power was both health points and the energy for using ultimate skills. Once magic power reached 0, the magic spirit would disappear and could not be summoned again for a short time or until its magic power was full. 6 attack and defense. Numerical values representing the spirit's attack and defense capabilities. 7 ultimate skill. The spirit's skill. Releasing skills consumed magic power. White cards had no skills, blue cards had 1 skill, purple cards had 2 skills, and orange cards had 3 skills. 1. To explain more vividly, Professor Kazel took out a spirit card as a demonstration. And in front of the freshmen, he summoned a white giant python exuding deep, chilling frost. The reptilian race, ice attribute, 3-star giant python gave the newly arrived and unaware freshmen a good scare. As magic theory class ended, the freshmen rushed out of the classroom as if liberated, heading towards the cafeteria in 2s and 3s. For students of this age, magic theory class was indeed a bit dry. But Dark listened very attentively. Even before the class ended, he saw the Greed +1, notification. Then he realized. So-called greed was a desire from the heart, beyond ordinary wants. His desire to alleviate his current predicament was considered greed. Even if he tried to occasionally drift off in class, it didn't work. This completely overturned his theory of drifting off. But this class did bring him some gains. The sheer number of races and attributes of magic cards, especially magic spirit cards, was beyond his imagination. Among them, the angel and phantom god races both possessed divine power. Phantom god race is said to be exclusive to god cards, and there are only a few in the whole world. But the angel race is just a rare race. If I could get 1 or 2 angel race magic spirit cards. Using divine power to restrain the power of a demon god was common sense in any world. Dark felt that he might have found a clue. However, Professor Kazel very clearly told them that within St. Marian Academy, both teachers and students could only use magic cards they made themselves. In other words, if he wanted to purify himself using angel race spirit cards, he could only make them himself. This was really too difficult. With a hint of worry, Dark had a simple yet not so simple lunch in the cafeteria, then returned to his bedroom, planning to take a nap to replenish his energy for the afternoon's potion class. Because Diana had Rose as a friend, she didn't bother him, which saved him a lot of trouble. But after only half an hour of sleep, he suddenly felt a pang in his heart and woke up with a start. Laziness +1, notification quietly flashed by. Damn it. Wrath +1, even napping is not allowed. Dark glanced at the wall clock again and couldn't help but smile wryly. It seems I have to set an alarm for naps in the future, no more than half an hour. Sleep can't exceed 6 in the morning, naps can't exceed half an hour. What kind of model youth is this? Dark summoned the system to check the 7 deadly sins index. Arrogance, 93, jealousy, 42, wrath, 95, laziness, 72, greed, 74, gluttony, 54, lust, 75. The overall trend was upward. Especially the wrath index. Although the wrath index was the most volatile of the 7 deadly sins, once the anger subsided, it would decrease somewhat. But it was still 2 points higher than at the beginning. This was not a good sign. Dark simply got out of bed, packed his potion class textbook into his bag, and prepared to read in the common room for a while. Originally, he wanted to go to the library to look up information about Demi-Devimon, so as to complete the summoning class assignment. But thinking that there was only a little over an hour left before the afternoon class, he decided to wait until after potion class before going to the library. Perhaps the homework assigned by the potion class professor would also require going to the library to research. Wait, if I spend a long time looking up information but can't find it, and then desperately want to finish the assignment and continue searching, will the greed index explode? Surely not. With faint worry, Dark welcomed his 3rd class of the day. Because he had previewed with restraint, his performance in this 3rd class was still good. Potion Professor Thompson was not the Snape type. Not only did he praise him, but he also added academic credits. The making of magic cards required potions, so one couldn't be careless. But Professor Thompson didn't mention any potions that interested him, so the greed index wasn't triggered. After 3 classes this day, whether professors or students, the way they looked at him had changed. Dark tried to minimize socializing with his classmates and went to the library as soon as class was over. The library was managed by a slightly plump Mrs. Bella, but the daily librarian was a senior female student. This female senior with long black straight hair was really Dark's type. He didn't dare look too much. After registering his name, he slipped into the library in a fluster. Such a cute freshman. Pandora watched the delicate-featured, shy little boy and couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. Unbeknownst to her, Dark, hiding behind a bookshelf, was gasping for breath, clutching his heart. The Lust +1 notification had defined this library as a devil's den. After him, Metis also entered the library. Chapter 10, Dark Demon Scorns Traps. Is there a library map? Dark took out his house card and injected magic power. Sensing his thought, the house card displayed a map of the library on its surface. St. Marian Academy's library had only 1 floor in total, but each bookshelf was terrifyingly tall. The academy used physical isolation to place more profound books higher up. Without the ability to fly, it was impossible to reach those deep tomes. But Dark's familiar had wings. This was an advantage. It was supposed to be a familiar replacing owls. But most students' familiars had no wings and couldn't fly. How awkward. Dark found the area marked familiars on the library map and immediately headed there. The difference between familiars and ordinary magic spirits was that familiars could exist outside of magic cards for extended periods and didn't require continuous magic power consumption from their masters. Magic spirits were different. No matter how powerful a magic spirit was, its existence had a time limit. Once this time limit was exceeded, they would begin to consume their own magic power, and would disappear when their magic power reached 0. Moreover, magic spirits had an intelligence level of 2, which was half a level lower than familiars, belonging to the inferior golem level. Because the library was too large, even with a map, Dark still spent nearly 10 minutes finding the bookshelf labeled Familiars. This entire bookshelf was filled with materials related to familiars. From here on, I have to search on my own? Dark couldn't help but look up. The bookshelf was so high it disappeared into the heights. He even wanted to use towering into the clouds to describe this bookshelf. This single bookshelf held an unknown number of books. How am I supposed to find anything? Do I have to go back and ask the librarian again? Seriously? Doing homework comes with the risk of +1 to my index. Dark declared he would absolutely not suffer this loss. So, he calmed down and prepared to search slowly from bottom to top. Demi Devimon belonged to the demon race, so he only needed to look for books related to the demon race. But he soon discovered that the books on this bookshelf were mostly things like special magic spirits, familiars, the untold story of familiars and spirits, beginner's guide to familiar creation, 101 key points to learn when creating familiars, and so on. Could it be that I'm in the wrong place? Dark realized that his thinking might have fallen into a misconception. Information about Demi Devimon shouldn't be found in the familiar area, but should be directly sought in the magic card or magic spirit areas. And it was best to look for spirit encyclopedia-type books with extensive catalogs. Once he understood this, Dark was decisive and immediately opened his house card to find the magic spirit section. As a result, there were dozens of rows of bookshelves labeled magic spirits. Okay, this time not only can't I see the top, but I can't see the end in front either. Dark sighed and began his long search. After spending a full half hour, Dark discovered a book tucked away in a corner among thousands of books, Into the Abyss. His almost despairing heart instantly revived. He quickly pulled out this 2-finger-thick book and flipped through it rapidly. There was a table of contents. Starting from the second page was the table of contents, recording thousands of demons. Dark didn't take the book to the reading room. Instead, he stood directly in front of the bookshelf and began to browse. Flipping back to the first page, a short sentence caught his eye. Go into the abyss, gaze into the abyss. Dark intended to skip it, but unexpectedly, his eyes blurred, and the line of words suddenly trembled, then transformed into another script that he had never seen before but could understand. This way of writing. Is it ancient script? Ancient script was an encrypted magic script used by ancient demons to pass down knowledge. This script was very special, with encryption levels from 1 to 12, requiring corresponding sequence demon bloodlines to understand. In this world, it was also a unique encryption method. Dark didn't know which sequence his current bloodline ranked, nor did he know the encryption level of this magic script. But this didn't prevent him from understanding this line. Part the mist, see the truth, the full moon will guide you. Dark blinked, then scoffed and directly flipped to the table of contents page. Then, according to alphabetical order, he found the demon race encyclopedia entry named Demi Devimon. After all, it was just homework for the first class of the first year. Dark suspected that Professor Sarah just wanted them to learn how to find information in the library. Because this encyclopedia clearly wrote down detailed information about Demi Devimon. Simply copying it would complete the assignment. He took out paper and pen and quickly transcribed. Demi Devimon belonged to the demon race, dark attribute, and in the demon sequence, it belonged to sequence 12, familiar, the lowest ranked inferior demon race. The encyclopedia described it as the trash of the demon race, a vile imp, without any power but fond of conspiracies and tricks, good at flattering superior demons, and eking out a living in the demon world by licking boots. No higher species. If it were a magic spirit. Demi Devimon's rank was 1 star, magic power was 100, attack and defense data were both 100, and the ultimate skill was small dart, projecting a giant syringe to extract the opponent's blood, consuming 50 magic power. Demi Devimon, as a familiar, Demi Devimon's attack and defense data were fixed at 100 each, magic power was 100, with no ultimate skill, but with a bonus to flight speed, and it came with the familiar exclusive skill, tracking. Basically, most familiars had this data, and were good at sending and receiving letters, able to replace owls or cuckoo birds. Dark quickly finished transcribing the information and nonchalantly returned into the abyss to the bookshelf. Then, he picked up magic spirit selections nearby and walked into the reading room. There was no homework for magic theory class or potion class. The time from this afternoon until bedtime was free. Freshmen liked to wander around the academy after finishing their homework, or play small games in the common room. Some people liked to rush to finish their homework after having their fill of fun. Dark had no interest in strolling around the castle, nor did he have any intention of socializing too much. The library was probably the most suitable place for him. Using the tea set in the corner, he poured a cup of special black tea that neutralized scents, placed it on the corner table, and then opened Magic Spirit Selections, flipping through the book with the mindset of reading an entertainment magazine. Dark deeply felt that this Buddhist-like lifestyle was most suitable for him. In the vast St. Marian Academy, only this small corner could give him some peace of mind. Very good. Not only did the 7 deadly sins index not increase, but it also decreased by 1.4, wrath, and 1.4, laziness. Chapter 11, Vert Gold falls into love. Just as Dark was casually absorbing knowledge, Emma Metis huffed and walked into the reading room. She had arrived at the library almost step for step with Dark, but she had spent longer amongst the bookshelves. Emma came from a scholarly family. Her father taught children calligraphy in the church, and her mother was a disciple of a sage. After humanity eradicated the demon race, they entered a Renaissance period. With the Valkyrie becoming famous worldwide as a representative of women, women's rights had been elevated to unprecedented heights. Many outstanding women emerged in various industries, and even in combat, they were not inferior to men. Moreover, magic proficiency was unrelated to gender, and the existence of female magicians further elevated the status of women. Influenced by her parents from a young age, Emma had a deep love for books and a strong thirst for knowledge. She had also inherited her mother's independent personality. It wasn't that she was bad at making friends, but since entering the academy, she had found the boys and girls of her year too childish, and thus had no interest in interacting with them. Besides, St. Marian boasted the kingdom's largest library, which was her dream paradise. Immersed in the excitement of seeing precious books, she couldn't help but linger longer among the bookshelves. Unlike Dark, who had only taken one book, Anthology of Magical Spirits, Emma had brought out a whole stack. She swayed slightly as she carried the books forward, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. Her journey was smooth. Emma found an empty table near Dark, put down the books, stacking them high, and then eagerly began to read. Too engrossed, she didn't notice Dark, who was just diagonally in front of her to the left. The 2 newly enrolled children, within a distance of only 2 or 3 meters, read their books peacefully. The library provided snacks for sustenance, but unlike the fragrance-free black tea, all snacks could only be eaten in the snack room. Around 6 o'clock, Dark went to eat 2 syrup biscuits. He dared not eat his favorite chocolate shortbread, and only drank a small cup of milk before returning to the reading room. Anthology of Magical Spirits could be considered a picture book, but it introduced interesting spirits, very diverse, and the descriptions were very humorous, accompanied by color illustrations. Dark gradually discovered that reading these more entertainment-oriented books was different from reading textbooks. As long as he didn't have a strong sense of purpose, he wouldn't trigger greed. Moreover, Anthology of Magical Spirits also contained some knowledge, so it couldn't be considered slacking off. Then he quickly realized that if there were trashy web novels for sale here, he would probably die miserably. The desire to binge read, not wanting to wait even a moment for updates, would be considered greed. Secretly reading formulaic, brain-dead novels with no nutritional value would be laziness. Reading a trashy web novel was estimated to incur double sin punishment. This was too terrifying. Around 7 o'clock, a group of noisy, mischievous children flooded into the library. Vert Gold was surrounded in the center, as the Nighthouse freshmen excitedly peppered the hero's son with all sorts of questions, completely unaware of the negative impact their behavior would have on the quiet library. Robert was squeezed out, like an ugly duckling abandoned by its companions at the end. Both of them had summoned their familiars one after another and were preparing to come to the library to look up information. But contrary to Dark's guess, Vert's familiar was not a stag, and Robert's familiar was not a hound. Librarian Pandora Dragon frowned beautifully as she watched this group of unruly little devils. Immediately afterwards, Vert and the others only felt a breeze pass by, and everyone's voices disappeared. Silence card? Vert abruptly closed his mouth, and then saw the girl behind the counter, her eyebrows raised and eyes glaring. The girl's skin was exceptionally fair, and her black waterfall-like hair cascaded down. Beneath the corner of her eye was a heart-shaped, scale-like marking. She slightly straightened and leaned forward, and the maternal parts of her body were deformed by the triangle formed by her torso and the counter, the raised rear outlining a perfect curve, and the legs under her skirt were astonishingly slender. Mama. The effect of the silence card just happened to dissipate, and the word Vert blurted out subconsciously was exceptionally clear and abrupt. Everyone abruptly turned their heads to stare at him. Vert's cheeks instantly flushed red, wishing he could bury his head in his chest, or rather, that senior's chest. Come here to register, Pandora said expressionlessly. These few freshmen gave her a very bad impression. Shouldn't freshmen be like that little blonde boy from before, Cute, innocent, and shy? That kind who would lower their head shyly, revealing a small animal-like expression when approached by an older sister. Slurp. Pandora quickly tightened the corners of her mouth, and glared even more fiercely at the bear children in front of her. Especially the one leading them. What was Mama all about? Did she look like his mother? Could it be? So lecherous at such a young age, how would he turn out in the future? Pandora's first impression of Vert was very poor. Vert, however, remained red-faced even after entering the library. The other students had dispersed, and only Robert remained by his side. Robert couldn't help but ask, "Vert, why did you call out Mama just now?" Vert took a breath and pulled out a delicate pendant from his collar. This was his most precious possession. Clack. He opened the pendant, revealing the photo inside. "This is my mother. I look at it every night and imagine what Mom is like." Robert quickly leaned closer. For some unknown reason, this photo only showed a side profile. And it was a side profile taken from a distance. Although this profile was a bit blurry, one could still make out Vert's mother's curvy figure and signature long black hair. It did indeed somewhat resemble that senior. Robert thought for a moment and suggested, "How about I go and ask that senior for her name?" Vert hesitated for a while, but finally shook his head. "Let's just forget about it." Then he silently began searching for information. The thoughts of young boys and girls are always difficult to guess. It was like Vert, though he said to forget about it, he kept thinking about it in his heart. It was also like Emma, who finally realized that the person who had been reading in her left front was dark, and felt that this person was so annoying, always wandering within her field of vision. But in her heart, she couldn't help but feel a hint of joy. After all, among the freshmen, apart from those from the Magic Academy, there really weren't many people as serious about studying as they were. Dark was the only person she felt was not so childish. At 9 o'clock in the evening sharp. Dark glanced at the clock, closed Anthology of Magical Spirits, and got up from his desk. Emma was still reading intently. Dark pretended not to see her. He followed the remembered number to find the bookshelf, returned Anthology of Magical Spirits to its original place, and then glanced at another location in passing. Walking into the abyss was gone. Someone had taken it. Chapter 12. Dark Demon tenaciously survives. Tuesday's classes were dueling, arithmetic, and magical history. The first-year dueling professor, David Jones, was a dueling master with 1/16th giant blood. Moreover, she was also the head of the noble house. On a side note, Night House's head was Professor Sarah Sylph, who taught summoning. Magic House's head was Professor Lily Laplace, who taught arithmetic. Fool House's head was Professor Dee Maxwell, who taught magical history. In true Gal game fashion, all 4 house heads were female. St. Marian Academy, from its name to its headmaster to its professors, exuded a sense of feminine dominance. Professor Jones, with her 1/16th giant blood, was larger than ordinary humans in every aspect. She had neat short hair, toned muscles, bronze skin, and excessively developed secondary sexual characteristics, radiating health and vitality. Although Dark wasn't particularly interested in this professor, who was over 2 meters tall and practically built like a basketball player, she seemed quite popular in the academy. It was rumored that Professor Jones's giant bloodline came from the giant royal family, and her father was a proper human noble. Although racially mixed, in terms of nobility, she was as pure as could be. Among St. Marian's senior students, both male and female, there were many admirers of Professor Jones, a testament to the worship of the strong. Both Noble House and Night House freshmen were full of anticipation for Professor Jones's dueling class. However, in this first lesson, Professor Jones only explained some very basic theoretical knowledge. This included the rules of dueling competitions, tactics, various magic card combinations, and the mutual restraint between races and attributes. The good news was that the dueling club's recruitment would be held on Friday afternoon this week. The bad news was that the prerequisite for joining the club was to possess at least a 20-card magic card deck. This bad news directly crushed the freshmen who were looking forward to dueling. It was only the second day of school, who could possibly have 20 magic cards? But then again, if you couldn't even assemble a deck, what were you even doing joining a dueling club? The following arithmetic class was even more tedious and difficult than dueling class. The freshmen were miserable, all saying that this must be the hardest first-year class. Diana said she was dreaming throughout the entire class. Rose, although listening attentively, had a confused look on her face, clearly only understanding half of it. As for Dark wasn't listening at all. This elementary-level math class was truly an insult to his intelligence. Arrogance +1, Professor Lily Laplace, who taught arithmetic, was said to be a pixie, a different race related to elves. Like elves, they possessed long lifespans and wisdom accumulated over time. Professor Lily Laplace preferred students to call her Professor Lily. Like most pixies, Her physical growth stopped at the appearance of an 11 or 12-year-old human, looking even younger than the freshman sitting before her. Her height was also similar to Diana's. In addition, she had a pair of dragonfly wings and liked to show her bare feet, never touching the ground. The magical history professor for the third class, Professor Dee Maxwell, was also a pixie, but she had butterfly wings, and looked much older, with deep wrinkles on her forehead. Professor Dee's teaching method was consistent with Professor Lily's, both completely reciting from the textbook. They might both possess vast knowledge and profound wisdom, but they were really not suited for lecturing. Magical history was arguably the most boring class. Fortunately, Professor Dee was very kind and friendly. Even if students accidentally fell asleep in class, she would only gently tap them and deduct 5 or 10 points. Professor Dee was also responsible for the astronomy class on Wednesday evenings. But astronomy class was an interest class and would only be held when Professor Dee announced it. In other words, there would definitely be no astronomy class in the first month of enrollment. Similarly, there was beastology on Fridays. It was said that beastology class on Fridays would only begin next semester. And it was very likely to be further postponed. First-year students were not allowed to enter the dungeon outside the castle, making it difficult to learn beastology well. In this way, there were only 6 classes a week: summoning technique, magic theory, potions, dueling, arithmetic, and magical history, each with 2 lessons. It could be said to be very relaxed. Library. Dark arrived before Pandora and completed the registration, securing yesterday's spot in the reading room. Then, he took out his arithmetic problem set and began to work on it. These problems were really too simple. Relying on the multiplication table, Dark swept through them all. By the time Emma sat down behind and to his side, he had already completed a small half. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the entire problem set was finished. This meant that the arithmetic homework for this semester was basically done. Dark finally closed the problem set, satisfied, and placed it in the upper left corner of the table. Because his mindset was calm enough while doing the problems, the greed index was not triggered. But when he felt happy about this, arrogance +1 floated into his vision. Are you saying I can even feel proud and complacent writing elementary math problems? Dark was shocked. Emma was also shocked. Emma simply couldn't imagine how Dark had finished an entire problem set in such a short time. They were all first-year students, why was he so amazing? Shocked, Emma redoubled her efforts to start self-studying arithmetic. And Dark, having finished his homework, looked at the arrogance index, which inexplicably wouldn't go down. The anxiety in his heart, though not outwardly visible, could no longer be contained. Am I really that arrogant? Dark began to ask himself. This question, he asked himself for a whole month. Dark didn't even know how he had survived this month. But as the saying goes, life is like being stalked by a yandeer. If you can't resist, you have to learn to enjoy it. Dark became the most watched star among the first-year freshmen. He would get up at 6 o'clock every morning and appear in the common room at 6:15 sharp. His familiar would circle around outside the castle and fly in through the ventilation duct of the cafeteria kitchen. The halfling chefs really liked this little demi-devilman that always came to deliver small gifts. Although those gifts were things like pebbles picked up by the river, wildflowers gathered by the roadside, lucky clovers under the sunset, beautiful colored feathers. They were the best gifts a small familiar could find. The halflings would tuck the wildflowers into their hair, imprint the lucky clovers into cards, and collect the pebbles and glass shards in jars. Every morning, the demi-devilman would fly in on time. Then they would hand the demi-devilman a basket that had been prepared in advance, filled with snacks and milk. The demi-devilman would use its 2 thick claws to grab the basket and fly steadily back to the noble house dormitory tower. Dark had become accustomed to eating breakfast in the common room. Eating while reading could effectively reduce the probability of triggering gluttony and greed. This was definitely his hard-earned experience. After finishing his meal, the demi-devilman would return the basket to the kitchen. Dark would continue reading in the common room. He would stay until the flow of people here gradually increased, then he would head to the classroom for his first class. At first, he was always the first to arrive in the classroom, but later he found that whenever there was a class with the Night House, there was always someone else who arrived earlier than him. Fortunately, this first female protagonist in the game hadn't fully blossomed yet and was not within his hunting range. Compared to the more troublesome Diana, Emma was simply like a kitten on the roadside, harmless to humans and animals. Diana gradually became more clingy to him. The cause was arithmetic homework. Diana really had no talent for arithmetic, and Rose wasn't much better. So these two best friends had a clever idea and approached Dark, who had gradually shown his top student aura. Dark had no choice but to impart a secret technique to them, vertical calculation method. Vertical calculation referred to performing calculations by listing a vertical formula in the calculation process, which could make calculations simpler. This secret technique was directly stolen by Professor Lily and spread throughout St. Marian. For the knowledgeable pixie, this calculation method was not necessary at all, but for beginners, it was simply a godsend. Professor Lily even named it, Dark's vertical method, and added a full 50 points to Dark's score. This made Dark very troubled. His arrogance index increased again. Dark had been very careful to control his emotions, but the 7 deadly sins index always managed to give him a surprise attack when he wasn't paying attention. Clearly, he had been trying his best to avoid socializing, pursuing a detached, desireless, and indifferent Buddhist lifestyle. However, the more he did this, the more prominent Dark became among the childish and mischievous freshmen. No one cared about the rumors before enrollment anymore. Everyone, based on seeing is believing, had a completely new definition of Dark Demon. Diligent, wise, handsome, and although a bit aloof, wasn't that exactly the image a high-ranking person should have? In comparison, Vert Gold, the other son of the Kingdom's twin swords, paled in comparison. Vert had not received preschool elite education, only learned to write and recite the addition and subtraction multiplication tables in the church. Although he was also very smart, his youthful nature was not yet gone, and he was always dragged around by Robert to play. As the saying goes, those who are near vermilion are stained red, and those who are near ink are stained black. Without Emma, the Miss Know-It-All, to supervise him, Vert only had Robert, who was dark as ink, by his side, and he naturally got dyed black as well. In addition, he was always distracted in class due to a kind of hazy feeling, and his studies became worse and worse. Just as the treatment of the original protagonist and villain was about to reverse, a card game called Love Fortune Telling suddenly became popular among the first-year students. But this had nothing to do with Dark, who had closed off his social circle. He still maintained his daily rhythm. Every morning, after the second class, he would go to the cafeteria first, have a slightly restrained lunch, and basically return to the common room around 12:05 p.m. Next, he would make a cup of coffee and continue reading. If there was homework that could be completed directly, he would do it first. After finishing his homework, he would continue reading. The demi-devilman would bring some biscuits and snacks, all of which were fragmented, coarse pastries that wouldn't trigger gluttony. And the books he read were no longer textbooks, but books related to magic theory and potions, borrowed from the library. Because he occasionally became too engrossed, the greed value was slowly increasing. After the third class in the afternoon, he would go to the library as usual. Having overcome the initial stunning impression, just making eye contact no longer triggered lust +1. But Senior Pandora's figure was really too seductive, always making him flee in panic. Occasionally, he would hear soft laughter behind him. Meaning unclear. Out of the total 7 indexes, laziness was the easiest to control. Dark didn't expect himself to be so persevering. The laziness value, after a month of effort, actually decreased instead of increasing. Next was jealousy. The first-year textbooks were really too simple. Relying on the magic power and related aptitude that were increasingly enhanced after entering the awakening phase of the demon god bloodline, he was not only outstanding in arithmetic class, but also among the best in summoning, magic theory, and potion classes. The only one who could compare with him in aptitude was Vert, who inherited the hero's bloodline. But Vert wasn't serious. Therefore, Dark couldn't find an object of jealousy at all. Except for occasionally feeling emotionally overwhelmed when seeing freshmen playing happily or chatting about youthful topics, jealousy basically didn't increase much, but it also didn't decrease. But as time went by, the number of times he felt emotionally overwhelmed recently was gradually increasing. Another emotion that was also accumulating in his heart was wrath. Yes, he could always suppress wrath in time, but the anger towards this demon god bloodline, the anger towards this demon god auxiliary system, had always been rooted in his heart and was getting deeper and deeper. If one day it suddenly erupted, Dark was very worried about this. Greed was still within control, but there was also a hidden danger of sudden outburst. In comparison, although lust was not as worrying, because Diana was getting stickier to him, from being sticky alone at the beginning of school to now being sticky with a best friend. Dark demon, reaping what he sowed. Every time Diana leaned over to ask him homework questions, he couldn't help but want to pinch her pink and tender cheeks. As a result, lust increased a lot. The key was that this thing only increased and never decreased. Dark had thought about whether he could use Sage Mode to break through it. But he didn't dare to try, afraid of suddenly exploding. Surprisingly, the most difficult to control turned out to be arrogance. Dark originally thought this was the easiest sin to control. After all, He had memories of his previous life. Even if he was temporarily affected by the personality of this life, he could always grind away that arrogant nature little by little. However, he never expected that the memories of his previous life were the real tumor. Looking at the arrogance index, which had already successfully broken through 100 by the end of the month, changing from ripe red to gradually blackish purple, he was completely distraught. On Friday afternoon of the 4th week of school, freshmen were allowed to leave the castle for the first time and enter St. Marian's only trading and leisure district, Travelers Street. Dark silently counted his academic credits, which were much more than ordinary freshmen. He knew his time was running out. Chapter 13, Dark Demon Steps on the Turning Point. Friday's schedule was very light, with only a dual class in the morning. From noon onwards, the passage to Travelers Street would open, remaining so until midnight on Sunday evening when it would close again. During this time, every student in the academy could freely enter and exit Travelers Street. It wasn't just the newly permitted freshmen, the upperclassmen, who had been cooped up in the castle for a whole week, also swarmed out. Although St. Marian provided all daily necessities for free, everything else had to be purchased in Travelers Street. Students could freely use their house points for consumption. Whether it was bizarre candies and toys, beautiful clothes and jewelry, or even cute dolls, they could all be found there. Of course, the most abundant items were various potions and other materials needed to make magic cards. Academy professors would assign upperclassmen homework that would take a week or even a month to complete. The materials needed for those assignments had to be purchased from the travelers' shops in Travelers Street. In addition, some students would also make their own potions, props, and semi-finished magic cards to sell at stalls in Travelers Street. Upperclassmen who were allowed to enter the dungeon could even hunt magical beasts, obtain materials, and sell them to merchants in Travelers Street. Merchants would also pay with house points. In Travelers Street, one house point was actually worth 16 saint coins, and this exchange rate would adjust with market fluctuations. The freshmen, in their first month of enrollment, were unaware that they could earn virtual tokens worth a full 160 saint coins just by attentively listening in each class. Based on 12 classes a week, this was a standard monthly income of 7,680 saint coins. And today, Travelers Street would deliver a heavy blow to some students who didn't pay attention in class. Dark, are you going together? No, I have things to do today. Then Roro and I will go first. I heard there's a quirky candy store in Travelers Street. I've wanted to check it out for ages. Diana, hooking her arm around Rose's, rushed out like a whirlwind. Dark shook his head. He had a very specific purpose today. Before heading to Travelers Street, he took out a notebook from his bag and carefully reviewed the various items he had transcribed inside. Vampire Fang, a vampire's fang. Piercing a blood vessel with it can bring tranquility, with the side effect of ecstasy after blood is drawn. Hat of Humility, a Daemon World nobleman's top hat. Anyone, no matter how crude, will become humble and polite upon wearing it, but will become furious upon taking it off. Tears of the Ocean, mermaid tears. Potions brewed from them have a slimming effect, but in reality, they achieve this by inducing anorexia. Margaret's red dancing shoes, the dancing shoes of the mysterious witch Margaret. Once worn, one can dance the most perfect dance in the world, at the cost of never being able to take them off. Queen Katarina's poison apple, apples planted by Queen Katarina in the royal palace's back garden. They can absorb desires of jealousy, transforming them into a deadly poison that plunges people into eternal sleep. Only a kiss filled with love can awaken them. Grandet's gold coin, gold coins inherit in Grandet's will. Those who possess them will become extremely stingy and greedy, viewing money as life and wives and daughters as dirt. Voodoo doll, a cursed doll made from intense jealousy as its source. Sticking needles into the doll will cause excruciating pain. Urn of abstinence, absorbs desires, putting people into a state of no sorrow and no joy. The side effect is losing even the desire to think. Ring of the Starry Sky, the Ring of the Starry Sky Great Magician. It can glimpse a corner of the universe's starry sky, making one feel their own insignificance, and may even cause one to collapse from fear. Nightmare Worm, can burrow into dreams and extract human desires, at the cost of having a hole drilled into one's brain. Magic Brain Dropper, extracts a small amount of brain matter, including emotions, desires, knowledge, etc. commonly used in the production of advanced magic cards. Overly frequent use can cause indirect amnesia. Holy Cross, can purify the soul, making the wearer's thoughts pure. The side effect is brain erosion. Requiem Bell, ringing the bell calms people, making them unmoved even by death. Moon God Incense, lighting an incense stick in the study can purify the mind, dispel distractions, and improve reading efficiency. Wrath of God, a magic wand from the old era. It can turn anger into flames of magic power. As long as anger persists, the magic flames will not extinguish. An entire notebook was filled with records of relevant items Dark had transcribed from various books over the past month. These items might be magic tools left over from the previous era, or they might have already been refined into magic tool cards. But regardless of which, they all had more than necessary effects in resisting the 7 deadly sins. However, as the saying goes, to gain something, you must give something in return. Many items had unavoidable side effects, and the price to pay was also very heavy. Currently, items with no apparent side effects were very few. Among these, the ones Dark wanted most, with acceptable side effects, and considered most likely to be obtained from Traveler's Street, were the Magic Brain Dropper, as an alchemical tool, and the top luxury item, Moon God Incense. Although Dark thought, Moon God Incense might more easily lead the mind to an endless thirst for knowledge, which was obviously very dangerous, and still needed to be tested. So, his purpose in going to Traveler's Street today was the Magic Brain Dropper. As an alchemical tool for extracting substances from the brain, the Magic Brain Dropper was suitable for the precise production of high-level magic cards. Dark had consulted many books and even inquired with Professor Kazel, a professor of magic studies, and was very certain that it should be able to effectively extract emotions and desires, provided that extremely high skill was required and it was not used frequently. If he really couldn't buy it from Traveler's Street, he would have to find a way to get this item from Professor Kazel's lab. Although it couldn't be used frequently, if he could exercise restraint, it should be usable for emergencies. The immediate problem was to extract some of the pride, sin. Only after the freshman lingering at the castle gate finally disappeared did Dark begin to walk, gracefully and with decorum, towards the castle gate. Noble education, engraved in his bones, allowed him to remain elegant even in the face of inner anxiety. The passage to Traveler's Street was located in the lakeside pavilion outside the castle. Crossing the long, garden-style bridge, he arrived at the beautiful lakeside pavilion. Dark habitually surveyed the environment. This reasonably spacious lakeside pavilion, apart from a circle of seats around the edge of the pavilion, also had a total of 8 sets of stone tables and chairs. Engraved on the stone pillar directly opposite was a line of text: "If we strive to seek, there will always be room for improvement, waiting for us somewhere." Dark blinked, watching someone sit on a stone stool, then twist their buttocks, and suddenly disappear. There were also people who twisted for a long time, remaining exactly where they were. It seems the entrance to the passage is shifting. 8 stone tables, 8 stone stools per table. Only by choosing the correct 8 stools can one enter Traveler's Street. He glanced at Robert and Vit, their faces flushed and necks thick, and then sat down on a stone stool at another stone table that no one had sat at before. He was very patient, waiting until everyone at the other tables had failed before slightly twisting his buttocks and disappearing from the spot. Chapter 14. Metis wants to try and change the same lakeside pavilion. But walking out of the lakeside pavilion and crossing the garden-style bridge led to a completely new world. What rushed towards them was the air of freedom. Students no longer needed to abide by the old-school rules. A magic card from the Costume Change series could make you colorful and diverse. Screw you, school uniform. Dark even saw a usually serious senior student scream on the spot. Her school uniform, which covered every important part of her body tightly, instantly transformed into a black lace-trimmed, bubble-sleeved, fitted, large skirt dress that revealed large areas of her shoulders and collarbones. Another senior student, with a watermelon-cut hairstyle and an honest look, even used a magic card to comb his hair back as he stepped off the bridge, completing the transformation from the watermelon cut to a slicked-back style. His school uniform also turned into a fitted suit that showed off his figure. And a magic card in his hand transformed into a bright red rose. He inserted the red rose into his chest pocket and walked with vigorous strides, showing no trace of his previous rustic appearance. Changing clothes, playing, dating, shopping, drinking, singing, dancing. Traveler's Street was like a fairy village completely separated from St. Marian, with everything St. Marian didn't have. And to enjoy all of this to the fullest, you only needed a little bit of academic credit. Although the Academy Cup was held every academic year, as expected, no one would start practicing restraint at the beginning of the semester for the year-end competition. Moreover, there was always a saying circulating within St. Marian that wasn't quite applicable to the general public: the more you spend, the more you earn. But because there were indeed a few role models, many people habitually used this as an excuse to convince themselves to spend one freely. Of course, there were also those who couldn't even afford to spend freely. When Dark saw Vert and Robert again after wandering around Traveler's Street for a while, the two were walking out of a toy store in frustration. Obviously, their nearly depleted academic credits were not enough to buy the toys they wanted. Dark didn't have that much leeway to pay attention to others, so he just glanced at them and strode away. Thus, he didn't see another academic credit tycoon, Emma, who happened to pass by, being pestered by two inferior students. Emma originally came to Traveler's Street to find some miscellaneous books not available in the academy library, but on the way, she suddenly noticed Dark, who looked like he was searching for something, and subconsciously followed him. As a result, she fell into Vert and Robert's entanglement. Exasperated, Emma said angrily, "So isn't it your own fault that you don't have enough academic credits? Even if a normal person hasn't earned any extra points, they should have 480 credits. What about you?" Vert said awkwardly, "I have 250. Robert's face turned red again. "Emma, we just want to borrow 5 academic credits from you. It's very simple for you, isn't it? We'll pay you back on Monday when classes start." Vert glanced at the new magic chess set displayed in the store and couldn't help but say, "Just 5 credits short." Emma looked at this classmate, known as the son of the hero, and suddenly felt a little pathetic. Then an idea emerged. Her brows furrowed again, and she suddenly said seriously, "I can lend you the credits, but you must pay me back double. And for each day you delay, you have to pay me back double the credits. The second day is double the first day, the third day is double the second day, and so on. I only accept one lump sum payment. If you agree, I'll lend you the credits, with our house cards as proof." Robert immediately agreed without hesitation, "Pay you back 10 credits tomorrow, 20 credits the day after, and 40 credits on Monday, which is just the credits from 2 classes. No problem." Although Vert felt that something was wrong, his eagerness to buy the magic chess set made him subconsciously ignore this strangeness. With their house cards as proof, and signatures on the contract, the two immediately rushed into the toy store and bought the latest magic chess set that could sing, dance, rap. At the same time, Dark, who had been shopping for a long time, finally found a store specializing in magic instruments. Morgan Shop. Traveler's Street was filled with all kinds of general stores, and many cheap items could be bought in any of them. But the magic brain dropper was an alchemical tool with extremely high professional requirements, and the price was also very expensive, only likely to be found in specialized stores. Dark searched for a long time before finding Morgan Shop in the gap between 2 jewelry stores. He pushed open the dilapidated wooden door and immediately smelled a musty, damp odor. "Little thing, don't mess around. You can't afford to pay if you break anything." One-eyed Morgan behind the counter only pushed up his eye patch to glance, and knew that Dark must be a freshman. And how many academic credits could a freshman earn in a month? Morgan couldn't be clearer. He unceremoniously issued an eviction order. "The cheapest thing in our store costs thousands of academic credits. This is not something a freshman like you can afford." Dark glanced at the test tube set on the shelf and suddenly asked, "Just this set of test tubes costs 1,000 academic credits?" This. One-eyed Morgan was really stumped by the question, and after a long while, he said angrily, "Why isn't this set of constant temperature magic test tubes worth 1,000? Dark, then what about this beaker, this flask, this evaporating dish?" One-eyed Morgan slammed the counter and stood up. "Mind your own business." Dark shook his head. It seemed this boss had a bad temper and was a bit childish, or maybe he just happened to be having his monthly mood swings. He didn't argue with One-eyed Morgan and just looked around on the shelves. There were test tubes and beakers. There was no reason there wouldn't be droppers, right? Flame crucible, fairy spirit alcohol lamp, magic separator, versatile glass rod, magic power dropper. This magic power dropper should be an inferior version of the magic brain dropper, only capable of absorbing a little magic power. A dropper was a short tube, with a narrow opening at one end and a rubber bulb at the other, used to measure liquids by drops. But in the magic card making process, it was usually used to absorb magic power, knowledge, thoughts, and even souls. Legend had it that magic masters would inject their souls into magic cards to create magic spirits with an intelligence level reaching standard 3.0. The magic brain dropper that Dark wanted was 1 grade lower than the soul-absorbing dropper. It wasn't an unattainable rarity. But this shelf, indeed, did not have it. He had no choice but to walk to the counter and wake up the one-eyed Morgan who was awkwardly pretending to be asleep. "Hello, boss. Do you have magic brain droppers?" One-eyed Morgan didn't even look up. "What does a freshman like you need that for?" Dark still maintained the necessary politeness, "For experiments." One-eyed Morgan raised his head, his gaze strange, but he still said, "Wait a moment, I'll go look inside." After a moment, he actually took out a magic brain dropper, but its condition wasn't very good. Chapter 15, Dark Damon is arrogance already overtly manifest. Dark glanced at the magic brain dropper in One-eyed Morgan's hand and frowned. "Why does this magic brain dropper look so sickly?" One-eyed Morgan casually said, "It's been sitting around for too long, that's why." Then he added, "You can't afford a good one anyway." Never a kind word, only harsh ones. "Dark, Having been tempered over the past month, wouldn't get worked up over such trivial matters anymore. Let me see it. One-eyed Morgan handed over the magic brain dropper. Dark pinched both sides of the magic brain dropper's neck and held it up to his eyes for close inspection. The magic brain of this magic brain dropper was already aged. It certainly didn't just look like it had been sitting around for too long. He had studied this thing carefully before. Magic brain droppers were living beings, although their intelligence level was only 0.1, basically on par with a paramecium, but as long as it was life, there was birth, aging, sickness, and death. The normal lifespan of a magic brain dropper was 10 years. In other words, this magic brain dropper was likely not going to live much longer. He couldn't help but ask, how many years has it lived? Only then did One-Eyed Morgan look at Dark properly, and unexpectedly, he gave a very precise number, 8 years and 6 months. Still has a little over a year left? Not entirely unacceptable. Dark pondered carefully for a moment, then looked up and said, quote me a price. One-Eyed Morgan grinned, for you, 1,000 academic credits. In reality, alchemical tools of the magic brain dropper's level, even with only a year left to live, couldn't be bought for a mere 1,000 academic credits. One-Eyed Morgan quoted this price purely to prove that Dark couldn't afford 1,000 academic credits. In other words, it was just to be annoying. But Dark didn't know this. He thought it was a normal quote and even bargained a few times. Seeing One-Eyed Morgan sticking to the price and not budging, Dark had no choice but to say helplessly, 1,000 it is then, wrap it up. Only then did One-Eyed Morgan become suspicious, pay first. Dark reached out and took out his house card, looking at him. One-Eyed Morgan hesitated for a moment, then also took out a merchant card specially prepared by St. Marian for merchants. Dark placed his house card on top of the merchant card. With just a thought, he transferred 1,000 academic credits from his house card to One-Eyed Morgan's merchant card. One-Eyed Morgan picked up the merchant card and scrutinized it carefully, his gaze becoming even stranger. He couldn't understand how a freshman who had only been in school for less than a month could have gotten a full 1,000 academic credits. But water once poured out, words once spoken, having said 1,000, it was 1,000. He didn't plan to go back on his word. Then, he took out an empty bottle from the cabinet, poured clean water into it, put the magic brain dropper into the water, screwed on the cap, and handed it to Dark. Here. Dark blinked, took the bottle, and turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, One-Eyed Morgan's voice came from behind him. Wait, what's your name? Dark Demon. 1,000 academic credits was not a small burden for Dark either. From the moment he planned to come to Traveler's Street to buy the necessary items, Dark had started accumulating academic credits purposefully. In the first year, it was really too easy for him to obtain academic credits. Even freshmen from the Magic House couldn't snatch a single credit from his hands. The only competitor was Emma Metis. Every time a professor asked a question, Emma would rush to answer. Dark found this annoying, so he changed his approach, obtaining extra credits by helping professors grade homework. Especially in arithmetic class, Professor Lily wished she could give him her position on the podium. So, in the first month, he earned a full 1,200 academic credits. Even Emma, who was also a credit tycoon, couldn't compare with him. Having spent 1,000, Dark, with 200 credits left, went to a general store and bought a whole set of basic experimental tools. And his trip to Traveler's Street ended there. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon. While the vast majority of freshmen were still lingering in Traveler's Street, Dark had already returned to his dormitory. He had to learn how to properly use the magic brain dropper before the end of this weekend. Before this, he had already borrowed relevant books from the library and studied them for a while. This book, Guide to Using the Magic Brain Dropper, hidden on the 23rd shelf, detailed almost all methods of using the magic brain dropper. It not only contained methods for extracting specific memories, but also how to mobilize emotions to make them easier to absorb. Using a magic brain dropper was a very dangerous thing, requiring extremely high magic power manipulation skills and more than necessary knowledge. Once operated carelessly, it was very likely to permanently extract parts of memory, directly causing amnesia. Historically, there was even a very unlucky magic master who accidentally permanently absorbed the sorrow from joy, anger, sorrow, and joy, and could no longer feel sadness ever since. Among them, the safest and simplest method of use was called the dragonfly skimming water method. In short, it was to place the tip of the magic brain dropper against the temple, and then gently squeeze and release the magic brain that replaced the rubber cap, sucking the naturally overflowing emotions, desires, etc. into the magic brain. As long as it didn't deeply contact the brain's thinking, the risk could be minimized. Dark was preparing to use this method. This was probably the only method he could currently use. Placing the prepared instruments on the bedside cabinet, Dark lay down, first calming his mind and breathing according to the methods taught in the book. Only after his breathing was smoothed could he concentrate and stimulate a specific emotion or desire through brain activity. But he omitted this step. Instead, he directly picked up the magic brain dropper, placed the tip against his temple, and lightly pressed the magic brain with 2 fingers, then released. A thread of extremely thin black line was sucked out from his brain just like that. As expected, there's no need to concentrate on stimulating emotions. My arrogance is already overtly manifest. Dark thought silently, not knowing whether he should be happy or not. In any case, he definitely couldn't get angry. System, display stats. Yes, a moment later. 7 indexes appeared in Dark's vision. Arrogance, 112, 111, jealousy, 44, wrath, 96, laziness, 60, greed, 82, gluttony, 58, lust, 90, arrogance, standing out on its own. As one thread of black line after another was sucked away, arrogance finally changed from 112 to 111. Eek! The magic brain dropper suddenly let out a sharp cry. Dark quickly stopped pressing. He had read in the book that the magic brain dropper's cry meant that its magic brain capacity had reached its limit. In other words, it can just about hold a little bit of arrogance. He carefully sat up, got out of bed, and came to the bedside cabinet. He moved a semi-finished blank magic card from the cabinet to the center. This kind of semi-finished blank magic card required extremely high craftsmanship, and making it was as time-consuming as fine carving. So most magic masters would choose to buy them directly from stores. Blank magic cards on Traveler's Street were priced at 10 academic credits. According to the exchange rate, it was more expensive than the market price. This price difference would attract more traveling merchants to settle in Traveler's Street. Dark only bought 5 blank magic cards. He placed the tip of the magic brain dropper against the blank magic card, and ignoring the magic brain dropper's cries, he forcefully squeezed the magic brain. Eek eek eek. The arrogance stored in the magic brain instantly spewed onto the blank magic card. The originally snow-white card surface was as if a drop of dark gold ink had been dripped onto it, suddenly spreading out. Chapter 16. The Medevman yearns to stand above the heavens. Ripples of deep ink spread outwards in circles. In an instant, the entire magic card was dyed a thick, dark gold. Once the dark gold color on the magic card became uniform and smooth, Dark immediately followed the knowledge he had learned in magic studies. He picked up a magic pen and began to inscribe the number 7 refinement array on the front of the card. This was a simple method for creating emotion series magic cards, capable of producing magic cards for various emotions such as sadness, joy, and anger. Using these magic cards allowed people to experience the corresponding emotion. Among them, the joy card was most popular among the upper classes. After a day of busy work, nobles would sit down and inhale a joy card to dispel their worries and greet the next day of busyness with a more positive outlook. In duels, skilled magicians would skillfully use emotion series magic cards to incite heightened emotions in their own or their opponent's magic spirits, thereby boosting their own magic spirits' combat power, or exposing openings in their opponents. Because the method for creating emotion series magic cards was very simple, it was set as the learning goal for freshmen in their first month. Dark was the fastest and steadiest at drawing refinement arrays in the class, even being nicknamed Eagle Hand for a time. The magic pin was a pin with a hollow interior, mimicking the structure of blood vessels. The mercury flowing through the magic pen's blood vessels guided magic power to the pin tip, making it easier for magicians to concentrate and refine magic power, and to outline finer lines. Although mature magicians could achieve the same even without using a magic pen, using one could indeed reduce the dispersion of concentration, thereby improving efficiency. Of course, beginners like Dark could not do without magic pens in the short term. The drawing of the refinement array had to be fast, steady, and accurate. Dark completed the outline of the number 7 refinement array in just 7 seconds. The final stroke finished, forming a circle, and the circuit connected. The instant the entire refinement array was completed, a strong white light erupted. But that white light quickly deteriorated, turning into the dark gold color of the magic card itself. Dark nervously watched the magic card. The final refining stage of a magic card was like putting all the ingredients in a pot and simmering them over a fire. No one knew what it would be like until the lid was lifted. The freshmen had completed this final step during the house sorting ceremony. However, the house cards had been adjusted to the point where they could automatically begin refining simply by injecting magic power. But the magic card before him was the first magic card Dark had crafted with his own hands. Its success was not only of great significance, but also represented that Dark had finally found a way to transform the 7 deadly sins into power. The essence of magic was subjective idealism. Whether it was knowledge, emotions, or thoughts and creativity, in the eyes of magic, they were all sources of power. There was no reason why the 7 deadly sins could not be transformed into power. Seconds later, the refinement array seeped into the card, penetrating the card back, fusing and refining the materials and the magic card. When the circuit of the number 7 refinement array clearly emerged on the back of the magic card, the refining of this magic card was considered complete. Next was the acceptance phase. Even magic cards produced according to established procedures would exhibit different effects due to various factors. Not to mention the magic card in front of him was self-made by Dark. He needed to conduct a small experiment. And the subject of the experiment naturally couldn't be himself. Dark's gaze shifted, and then he looked at Demon, perched on the bird stand on the ceiling, mimicking an owl. Then, a kind smile appeared on his face. Although familiars could only be considered pseudo-life forms, they were still species with an intelligence level of 2.5, with emotions and independent consciousness. As such, they should be affected by emotion series magic cards. Dark beckoned to Demon. Demon tilted its head, then spread its wings and flew down. Dark picked up the Arrogance magic card and took it to the desk on the other side. Then, he pulled out a bird chain from the desk drawer, opened the clasp, and fastened it to Demon's left ankle ring. The room's windows had been closed all along, and the curtains had been drawn tightly, forming a perfect locked room. After being fitted with the ankle ring, Demon couldn't help but reveal a woo-woo little expression. Dark observed for a while and noted the time in his notebook. 3:29 p.m., let's wait another minute. Exactly 3:30 p.m. My turn, magic summoning. Dark pinched the Arrogance magic card between his index and middle fingers and activated summoning art. In an instant, the magic card activated. A layer of black light rippled across the card's surface, and a dark golden light sphere with a long tail suddenly flew out from the magic card, swaying and drilling into Demon's head. In that instant, Dark and Demon squinted their eyes simultaneously. Time seemed to stand still, the room so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Demon opened its eyes first, dark golden light blooming from the slits of its eyes. Its lips curled upwards, its eyes sharp, its chin slightly raised, and it opened its mouth to say, I, Demon, will stand above the heavens. Dark was first stunned, then overjoyed. Whether Demon was affected by the Arrogance magic card and became arrogant or not, was no longer so important. The most important thing now was that it could speak human language. As everyone knew, Digimon could speak human language. But the mechanism of familiar birth was not the same as Digimon. At least this Demon originally could not speak, and its intelligence level was also slightly lower than ordinary beasts. But now, after absorbing the energy of Arrogance, it spoke so fluently. Does this mean its life form has been changed, further approaching that of a Digimon? Professor Sylph said that the birth of a familiar is inseparable from the magician's magic power, knowledge, personality, and other factors. Perhaps, this familiar I summoned, and the Demon that exists in this world are not the same life form. Merlin, the greatest magician in history, once said, the difference in cognition determines the difference in magic. Also, Dark looked at the Arrogance magic card in his hand. Fine cracks had appeared on the card's surface. Emotion series magic cards were supposed to be reusable. It seemed this magic card had transcended the category of emotion and was disposable. Dark was reminded of a word, demonization. The so-called magical beasts in this world were all berserk beasts that had lost their minds after being demonized. Demon's current state should be closer to Arrogance demonization than just demonized. He thought for a moment and recorded this type of magic card as Arrogance 1. Then he wrote down the corresponding effects in his notebook. Next, he prepared to further observe this Arrogance demonized Demon to see how long it would take to return to its original state. Servant. Unleash my shackles. Recommend it. Chapter 17. Dark Daemon is about to embark on a path of greatness. It seems, Arrogance I didn't imbue it with excessive power. Dark carefully observed the Demon's behavior. Its own will was still present, but its personality had changed based on the influence of Arrogance I. It seemed eager to break the bird chain, feeling it was a form of insult. However, its strength was not enough to support it in breaking free from the chain. Speaking of strength, Dark immediately thought of the Demon's ultimate skill, Small Dart. As a familiar, it originally did not possess the ability to release ultimate skills. But now it had changed so drastically, perhaps it could. So Dark wrote a few words in his notebook and looked up, Demon, use, Small Dart, against the wall. The Demon, however, folded its wings, lifted its head forcefully, and said arrogantly, unlock. Hey! Dark couldn't help but chuckle. But a familiar was ultimately a familiar, and it could not truly disobey its master's will. To better observe the demi-Deviman's skill release, Dark unlocked the clasp on its ankle. Having gained freedom, the demi-Deviman immediately fluttered around the room twice. Then, it vigorously flapped its wings and shouted, "Small dart!" Small dart. In an instant, 3 shark-headed syringes appeared from under its wings, shooting towards the wall. Puff puff puff. The 3 syringes simultaneously pierce the wall, forming a perfect triangle. But after a short while, these 3 syringes turned into specks of light and disappeared, leaving only 3 holes in the wall. Dark immediately wrote in his notebook, "Skill release successful, proving the experimental subject is no longer a familiar." At 3:43 p.m. the dark gold color in the demi-Deviman's eyes gradually faded, returning to the normal pale yellow state. Immediately after, it suddenly blinked, stretched out its wings, and with its head held high, fell backward onto the table with a thud. Its claws stiffened straight, looking just like a dead sparrow. The duration of the arrogance state is about 13 minutes, 3 to 5 times stronger than the effect of ordinary emotion cards. Dark wrote this line in his notebook before looking up at the demi-Deviman, saying helplessly, "Stop playing dead." The demi-Deviman remained motionless. Dark then reached out and scratched it under the chin. The demi-Deviman immediately giggled and curled up into a ball. Then it suddenly twitched, stiffly raised its head, and looked at Dark with pleading eyes. "You weren't making that face when you pointed at my nose and called me a servant just now," Dark said deliberately with a straight face. The demi-Deviman, however, rolled its eyes and immediately sensed that its master was not angry. It quickly flattered, "Master." Dark felt a chill run down his spine. But he quickly wrote in his notebook, "The change in life form has not reversed." Although the mysteries within were not fully explored, the demi-Deviman, after being baptized by arrogance, had indeed transformed from a familiar into a life form very close to a Digimon. Dark tentatively concluded that this change should be irreversible. It was akin to a magic master awakening their talent and possessing magic power, becoming extraordinary from then on. And after its awakening, the demi-Deviman became even more garrulous. The originally silent demi-Deviman, although occasionally mischievous, was well liked for its good habit of being the ultimate bootlicker. But what if it could speak? And constantly be sarcastic and disgusting all day long? This was truly a point that needed attention. Dark didn't want to miss out on St. Marian's unique takeout again. Perhaps, giving it a muzzle would be a good idea? Under the gaze of its master's strange eyes, the demi-Deviman quickly stood up, obediently folding its wings behind its back, like a scolded primary school student. Dark shook his head, deciding to continue his research first. "Right, you're not allowed to speak in front of outsiders." Now, using the magic brain dropper, the arrogance index had been reduced from 112 to 111. But it was still far from enough. However, the use of the magic brain dropper was very dangerous and required caution. Dark did not immediately start using it a second time. The guide to using the magic brain dropper clearly stated, "If you don't want to suddenly become an idiot,